Good day to you all. Before we officially start this webinar, I'd like to address you briefly on behalf of USAID Tourism team. I will wait for a couple of minutes to let everyone in, since we had a huge number of people registering for this webinar. So another 2 or 3 minutes, bear with us, and then we'll officially start. Thank you for your understanding. So here we are. It's time to officially welcome you all. My name is Ruba Velagic, and I welcome you on behalf of USAID's tourism project. Over the last 3 days, the project has been organizing interesting and creative workshops with Alex Kravitz that are focused on storytelling, connecting heritage development and promotion, and how all this can actually impact the development of sustainable tourism in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we delivered this workshop in the last 2 days with DMOs and representatives of the industry. And today we have quite a diverse audience, and so to say unusual one given our scope of works, and today we have media with us. Thank you very much all for expressing your interest in this agenda, in this program, and being keen to contribute to promoting Bosnia and Herzegovina with all its characteristics, uniqueness, and etc. So not to take much of your time, the floor now goes to Alex. Enjoy. And we are at your disposal for any further communication and exchanges that you want. So again, thank you and have a fruitful day.
Thanks a lot, Ruba. And can you hear me okay? Everything okay with the audio on my end? Okay. Thanks again to everybody at Turizam for putting on the last couple of days. And this is now the 3rd day of this workshop series, which is dedicated to developing travel narrative and adding that to your products if you're a tourism operator, or your campaigns if you're a DMO, or in this case today, developing better stories, better community-based and local stories. If you are either in the media, perhaps an aspiring travel journalist, or just somebody who's interested in travel journalism or travel writing or blogging, or being more effective in the way that you communicate a travel story. Today's day is one that I feel like is perhaps a little bit more open to all 3 groups. I mean, all 3 of them are open. There's a lot to learn, even if you don't consider yourself a DMO or a tourism operator or a travel writer. There's a lot to learn when you listen to any of these workshops, because the fact of the matter is we all need to work with each other to do the jobs that are necessary to promote tourism in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It is a process where each of us needs to know what is necessary for the others to be able to do the best job possible. For DMOs, it's necessary to understand how journalists work, because it's necessary for DMOs to provide the right kind of information so journalists have a better opportunity to sell their stories to their editors. Tourism operators are in the same situation. If they have a product that they want to communicate with the rest of the world, and they want to do it with travel magazines, travel websites, international publications, it would be in their best interest to understand how journalists work, even if they have no desire to write a travel story themselves. Because the more you know about what each of the other groups, each of your other counterparts do, the better opportunity you will have to be successful communicating your story to the rest of the world. I know that that seems obvious, but I think many things that we do, not just in tourism, but in life, tend to become very specialized. And that specialization takes us away from opportunities to see how to better work as a team. With that being said, we are starting with travel narrative design. And my name is Alex Kravar. I am a responsible tourism advocate, which is what I consider to be my primary position, title, whatever you want to call it, because understanding the ways that tourism can best work for a destination instead of the destination working for tourism is not just important because it sounds good. It's important because it allows that destination to remain healthy and successful into the future. Any destination can have short-term success, but without the kind of responsible thinking necessary to make sure that that success is coming from the right place, then a place is potentially in a situation where they are not, positioned to be successful into the distant future. And the good news about that is once you have started to create stories that position you for the future, you are in a position to really move forward in a way that will be long lasting because you put in the work necessary to find the real stories, not just the today's slick marketing campaign that happened to make you popular, but wasn't a true sense of who you are. It was just a way to get people to come to your destination. The slightly less good news, although I personally think it's also good news, is that in order to do this kind of responsible tourism, it means that you have to work a little bit harder. You have to be a little bit more creative. You have to think with your critical thinking ability to understand what you have, understand how to make it better, understand how to communicate your story to the world, and then understand that that is a necessary amount of work if you want to be sustainable. And we'll talk about sustainability in a little while, but very briefly, I'd like to say sustainability to me is not just whether you recycle or whether you are doing the best things for the environment. That's part of it. But sustainability to me means telling your own story, being in control of your own narrative, being in control of what the rules of tourism are for you instead of just following trends and hoping that travelers come to visit you. I am by trade, a travel journalist and have been for more than 20 years. I've written for a lot of publications. You can see some of them here, but rather than making this look like I'm some kind of clever guy, I want to make it very clear that anybody who is in this business for as long as I've been in the business has written for a lot of different people. So don't be too impressed by this. I just needed to put something so that you see that I work for different publications. anybody in the audience right now who's with the media or anybody who wants to be a travel journalist, if you put in the effort and you do it for any length of time, I promise you that you will also be published by a lot of different publications. And perhaps many of you in the audience already have been, and perhaps many of you in the audience have a longer history of being published than I do. I'm very aware of the fact that that there are many experienced journalists in the audience right now. That being said, let's talk about the purpose that we're looking at today. This is going to be roughly a 3-hour workshop. And during that time period, we will take a look at what tourism is today. And for me, it means looking at an open landscape, an open opportunity, because COVID messed all of us up in some way. Not just tourism in countries and destinations, not just tourism in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which I know, suffered greatly during COVID. I've seen the numbers. I know the kind of percentages that has been published about the kind of nosedive that tourism took during these last 2+ years. But all of us, tourism officials, tourism professionals, travel writers like me, a lot of publications weren't ready and didn't want to start publishing stories for people who can't really travel. Again, that's not meant as any kind of complaint on my part. That's life. It's unfortunate the last 2 years feel like that they just disappeared without being able to cover travel, especially cover countries like Bosnia and Herzegovina. But what can I do? What can we all do? It's just where we are at the moment. But this is a moment where we can redefine ourselves. We can redefine the country. We can start thinking about what the goals are for leaving this period behind and starting fresh. Bosnia has an incredible amount of strengths, and starting fresh doesn't mean figuring out how to create new strengths. For me, starting fresh means understanding what you have and then figuring out how to communicate that best with the world. And right now, we're in a position of not having to worry about all of the past tourism trends that were governing our industry before, many of which were irresponsible. And we have an opportunity to redefine what tourism is for us. And in Bosnia and Herzegovina's case, what it means to Bosnia and Herzegovina under Bosnia and Herzegovina's rules, not just bowing down to foreign trends and foreign rules of engagement. It's really important, this point. And, I'm going to go off script. Sorry, sorry, interpreters. I'm going to go off script on multiple occasions because this is a point of passion for me. The idea here of being true to the destination first is the absolute most key component of all of these workshops. I know that this is a project that we're all here because of, and I'm very thankful that Turizam has asked me to do this. I'm very thankful to be here and to be a part of this. Absolutely. And projects are important. They provide money. They also provide a certain amount of momentum. They provide venues like this one for us all to get together and communicate about what needs to happen for us to get better in this industry. But it's also important to remember that it's just a project, and this is a foreign country that is coming to help, but they don't have all the answers. People in Bosnia and Herzegovina have the actual answers. I, Alex, am here for the moment to give you my opinion and to share with you my experience about what I have seen and done over the last 20+ years, to give you a version of the workshops and the classes that I have given over the years trying to potentially help inspire people to think more critically for themselves. But my purpose here is not to tell you how to think, obviously. I don't want to seem like some clever guy who thinks he has all the answers. I'm learning just like everybody here. There are plenty of things that I don't know, and even more that I will never know. As my grandfather used to say, you could fill a warehouse with what I don't know. So I'm learning just like everybody else. Projects are important, but the most important thing, if you want to truly be sustainable, is to figure out how to do it for yourself. If you can combine those two, get the support of a project for a brief amount of time and develop a real sense of how to best come up with your own rules that are ones that apply to you, and to ignore the trends out there that actually work to put you in a difficult situation, then I think all of these conversations take on a more useful approach. So when we start this new era in the industry, let's start it correctly. Let's think about Bosnia and Herzegovina being the main character in this situation. It's the rules that the people in the audience right here, right now, are going to create for the future that matter. No foreigner can tell you what to do, nor should they. They don't know Bosnia and Herzegovina. You do. This project is fantastic, but most of the people who are involved in this project who are not Bosnian won't be here when the project is over. It's not that they don't love Bosnia and Herzegovina, but they'll move on to the rest of their lives. The people in this audience right now will be here to continue the work after any project is over. So let's start creating the rules for yourself in a way that makes it so that you are in charge of this situation. That means taking sustainable ownership of the country right now, with the stories that you cover, with the things that you find important, not the things that foreigners tell you are important. Let's figure out the things that people in this audience right now find are important. And your real job here is to not be the most unique destination in the world, because that's not even a real phrase. You can't be more unique. You're either unique or you're not. You can't. And we're not trying to figure out how to make Bosnia and Herzegovina the most fascinating or the most exciting place in the world. We're trying to find out what makes it fascinating or exciting. Every place is fascinating and exciting. And in fact, one could argue that every place is the most fascinating and exciting destination of itself. Bosnia and Herzegovina is the most fascinating Bosnia and Herzegovina on the planet. Of that, I am positive. But it's only fascinating because it is true to itself. It's not trying to create a tourism model based on what other countries have done. You can't do what other countries have done. You can only work on your own strengths. So obviously I'm going on and on about this point, but this point is that important. Let's figure out what makes Bosnia and Herzegovina unique. And then the key thing for this particular workshop and the last two is then figure out how to share that with the world. Let's not worry about what other people are doing. Let's not worry about what anybody tells you Bosnia is. Let's worry about what we think it is, what you think it is in the audience, and then how to share that with the world in your own unique way. This workshop is for travel journalists. It's for people in the industry who want to communicate what they do better, and for people in the industry who want to communicate with travel journalists, and folks who just like to write about travel, generally, tourism. Perhaps you're a tourism operator, perhaps you're a DMO, perhaps you are the one who needs to communicate with the world through your website. That's also travel writing, by the way. You don't need to be published by a big publication to be a travel writer. You just have to be true to yourself. So what this workshop will do It's going to be, at the beginning, we're going to present an overview of travel journalism and what writers and media do. We're going to try to equip this group with the tools to create the narrative about a destination. We're going to try to introduce a new lens, a new way of looking at tourism that, again, is not so dependent on foreign opinion, but makes it clear that the opinion of people from Bosnia and Herzegovina is by far the most important. It's not even close. Establish the vocabulary of the business. This is good for everybody. It's great if you're somebody who's trying to be a journalist, but it's important to understand the language of this business, even if you're not, because then you know how to better communicate with journalists. We're going to provide some insight into how to engage the audience through your stories. And then also we're going to focus on how to propose your stories to editors. And if you're a DMO or an operator, how to propose that to a journalist who then has to propose that to an editor. So DMOs, travel operators here, perhaps you were at the last couple of workshops, but this is worth repeating. In this business, if you're trying to communicate with a travel journalist, a travel writer about what your region, what your tourism operation does, it's almost always the case that that journalist is then going to have to sell that idea to an editor. So it's not like you communicate to a journalist and the journalist immediately gets it published. They have to take what you want and then take it to an editor, and hopefully that editor agrees that it's a good story. But as we will see, it is often not the case that an editor agrees. So the closer we can get it to being a professional, clear proposal, the closer we will get to potentially getting that thing published. And I just want to make a couple of points here that I have made many, many mistakes in my career. I have written bad proposals, not on purpose, but because they just weren't great, because of lack of experience, a lack of whatever. I mean, a lot, we all make mistakes. We all have to learn from these mistakes. I've had many more no's, many more refusals, many more negative emails back from editors than positive. Anybody who's a travel journalist will say the same. It doesn't matter how good you are or how long you've been doing it. Most of the time when I pitch a story, so that we're going to go ahead and start the vocabulary of the profession right now. When I pitch a story to an editor, most of the time they say no. That's true for all travel journalists. And I've made dreadful mistakes in my pitches. I've made pitches to one editor saying that I was pitching it to a different magazine and had forgotten that I was still left the name of the other magazine in the pitch that I'm pitching to the new editor. It happens, but we've got to learn from these mistakes and try to get better from them. But we're not perfect. So I'm learning like everybody else. I want to make sure that that is clear, because this is not a mystical process. I know it seems like there's some kind of cosmic thing at play when you write a pitch and get some kind of big magazine to run your story, to publish your story, but it's not. And we will see why it's not as we go along. It is a business. You need to be professional like any other business. And if you do those things correct, you won't get yes all the time, but you won't get no all the time too. And that's actually what we're trying for here. We're not trying to have 100% success, but we're trying to increase the level of success. The protocol for this workshop, after now multiple days of giving these workshops, I'm well aware that most people in the audience here are not going to ask questions, and they're not going to butt in and say anything while I am giving the workshop. But I am a fan of people asking questions and even asking tough questions to figure out how I can be helpful. Again, I don't need to be clever all the time, and I'm not clever most of the time. But I do like talking about this stuff, and I like communicating with other people who like talking about this stuff. I like sharing that passion, and I like promoting other people having passion too. I don't think that I'm right a lot of the time, but I feel like if we communicate, we can probably get to answers that are comfortable for most people. So feel free to ask questions. You don't need to agree with everything I say. The main thing I want out of this is that people think, really think. I think that the last couple points on this slide are important. Be a problem solver. Not everything I say is going to be perfectly applicable, is going to perfectly apply to you. But probably something in what I say will have some value. It may not be exactly your situation, but take what it is that you need and forget the rest if that's what's necessary. But think critically. Think about what has been said. Think about how you can innovate what I've said, make it better for your situation. That is going to be the key point of success here. Everybody I know who is successful is able to take information, figure out what about that information applies to their situation, forget about the rest, and then take that information that they need and change it so that it actually works better for them. That's called innovation. So being innovative will lead to success. For all I know, the things that I say today, people in the audience will take, change, and create and make it more creative than I could have ever imagined. It's not just for all I know. I'm certain that there are people in the audience who are capable of that. I'm positive that there are people in the audience who are more creative than I am. I am also positive that there are people in this audience who are better writers than I am. Not just positive, I'm certain of it. In fact, I'm even certain that there are people in this audience who are better writers in English than I am. I know how well Bosnians speak different languages. I know how well many of them speak English. I also know how hard high school is in Bosnia as compared to where I'm from. Gimnasia in Bosnia is many more times hard than the high school that I went to. I'm certain of that. So the larger point here is take what I have, use it, figure out how to make it better. But don't take what anybody says as the expert opinion. I really can't stand the word expert. I'm an expert in the handful of things that I know well through experience. You all are experts in things that I will never know about. Everybody here has that. The lecture, the structure for the day is a simple one. We've got two halves of the day. We're going to have this introduction period where we talk about the foundation of travel journalism. We talk about storytelling, and we talk about tourism promotion. At the end of the first half, there will be an exercise, and I'm going to ask you to come up with 3 story ideas. I would suggest go ahead and pulling out your pad and your paper and your pen and start that process now. This isn't a test. I'm not going to quiz you at the end. Anything that you do or don't do is up to you. Obviously, this will be more valuable if you do some of these things. But, you know, again, if you want to just listen, feel free. If you want to vacuum the apartment while I'm talking, I would. If you want to start drinking because it's Friday and it's the afternoon there, I definitely encourage it. I'm sure that the most of the things that I say will be more entertaining if you have a couple of drinks in you. But I also suggest you pull out a piece of paper and let's talk about 3 ideas that you have that would make good stories from where you're from. either from your region, your municipality, maybe from Bosnia and Herzegovina generally, whatever. And the larger point here is that getting these story ideas together will give you the ability of starting to make them good. The first story ideas you write on the page are not going to be great. Mine aren't great either. The first draft that I typically write of a story is a disaster. It's horrible. But that's part of the process. Part of the process is starting the process, which is the hardest part. And then getting the bad stuff out so that you can get it down to what actually works. It's always the same for me. It doesn't matter how good or how bad a story I eventually write. To get to that place, I need to sit down, go through the hard moments of sitting in front of a blank screen or a blank paper and try to figure out how I'm going to start this thing. And it always starts poorly, but it always gets better because I need to get the bad stuff out first. There's a quote that I love, and that is, "Inspiration is for amateurs." For me, that means that although we're all waiting to sit there and be hit with a lightning bolt with some brilliant idea and some kind of inspired thought about how to do something, in this case, writing, it doesn't work that way. I mean, it may happen that way 3 or 4 times in your life. You know, from what I understand, Paul McCartney wrote the song Yesterday because it came to him in a dream. You know, maybe that happens to you 2 or 3 times in your life. It doesn't happen to you over the course of your entire career. The way it works in real life is that you sit down every day and you do the hard work of failing until you succeed. The vast majority of my time is spent writing things that aren't very good in order for me to edit it down so that I get something that is acceptable. So you're not going to randomly be inspired by a lightning bolt. Inspiration is for amateurs because it means folks who are waiting to be inspired before they work won't be working very often. The folks that sit there and do the hard work of thinking and struggling with coming up with ideas, even when they don't feel like it, will eventually get something on the page that they can eventually edit and make better. Okay, I don't need to go on about this. Everybody, I'm sure, can understand the concept. In the lecture 2, we will be finding and researching and talking about writing stories and what the structure of the story looks like, what the components of the story will be, and talking about how to interact with the different travel media markets. We'll also have a guest speaker during that period, a former editor of mine and a former editor at National Geographic Travel here in the United States. And then what I'm going to ask is that for the last lesson of the day, the second lesson of the day, is that you're going to take the best of those 3 ideas and choose the one that you think really has the potential. And again, I would, if it were me, I would start now with writing down 3 ideas, even before we start talking about this. And then those ideas will evolve as we talk. And then even before we get to the end of the class, you'll know which one is the best one, which is the one that you would pitch to an editor, which is the one that makes the most sense for you to communicate with people who you don't know, so that they can pass judgment on your idea. And go ahead and be working on that one in the second half of this workshop as we go through case studies of different stories that worked, some didn't work. That I'm going to leave that up to you to decide what parts of these ideas did and didn't work. And go ahead and be working on your story idea. Use this as a moment to really, to master class your, to workshop your story idea. Use this as a time for working, not just for listening. Be active. We're all professionals here. So let's use this time productively. Let's have this serve multiple functions. I love work periods and things that I create to serve multiple purposes. Maybe I write something that works as an entry content for a website that can also be recycled and used as a press release for something that we're doing, that also gives me the inspiration for writing the first half of a travel story. I like it when when work is never wasted. It's used in multiple ways. This clearly was meant, this slide was meant for us doing this workshop in person. But I think that there's advantages to doing it like we're doing it. I mean, I think more people can actually participate in the way that it is presently, and you can do so from the comfort of your home. You can sit on the couch with a pad and paper as opposed to, having to be formal. The negative parts of this, of course, are the fact that we don't have the kind of immediate person-to-person interaction that I prefer. I love giving workshops and I love what we're doing right here. This isn't just something that I do for a living. I really, really enjoy doing it. So that's a shame too, because I like the kind of camaraderie, and I like being colleague. I like when colleagues sit and talk and debate, and I love that stuff. But that's not our situation, and we have positives to being in this virtual situation too. So what I still would ask is, write down the things that I've asked here for purposes of trying to get to the point of what it is that you're actually trying to do. I suppose you don't need to write down your own name. If you need to do that, there's probably bigger problems at hand than just learning about travel journalism, unless that makes you happy. And if you're trying to discover yourself, I say go for it. Let's make this moment the first day of the rest of your life. Where you're from, why that's important to me is because that's also going to have something to do with what your strengths are as a travel journalist. What's your experience in journalism or tourism? Both, neither. It doesn't really matter to me. I mean, anybody who's going to sit here for this workshop is going to learn something. And hopefully there's things that you can take away from this. You don't need to have a prior experience in this. What you're going to know by the end of this session is a lot of what I know. So you and I will be colleagues at the end of this. We'll be much closer to being equal colleagues than we are guy who's giving workshop and person who's listening. And that's my goal really here, is for at the end of this, for us to basically be equals, for us to be colleagues, so that in the future we work together. There will be many times, I hope, for some of the people in the audience when I'm in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that you may call on me and ask my opinion about something. And there hopefully will be times when I am calling you and asking your opinion, because I have XYZ story about Bosnia and Herzegovina and I need to communicate with an expert. Because let me tell you, I love Bosnia and Herzegovina. I have been writing stories about it in one way or another for more than 20 years. In some ways, I owe my entire career, if we want to call what I do a career, I owe my entire career to Bosnia. They were the first real travel stories that I ever wrote. People there have always been incredibly helpful to me. They were patient, even when I was being ignorant, and which is still the case today. They endured my idiocy, which largely is the role of any journalist, is to go from a position of not knowing much to communicating with experts, and hopefully they're patient enough so that they teach you so you know just a little bit more. As a journalist, my goal here isn't to be an expert about Bosnia and Herzegovina, even though I love the country and I probably know a little bit more about it than most foreigners. My goal is to know more than the people who are reading stories that I'm writing. I'm not trying to be the most clever guy in the world. I'm not even pretending. I know that I'm not. But I'm trying to learn enough so that I can help other people get to my level. And the necessary component in that is meeting, getting to know, depending on experts within the country, the locals who live in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That is my goal. So I am always trying to figure out how to be a better journalist, and hopefully you will too. I don't know. And then maybe, you don't need to write down why you're interested in this workshop, but I think it's important for you to say, at least to yourself, what you want to accomplish here, because trust me, you could do a lot better. You could do a lot more entertaining things than watch me for the next couple of hours. So talking about tourism generally, most folks in tourism work in this equation. Development plus promotion equals hopeful success. What do I mean? Most projects are based on supporting development and then waiting until near the end of the project to do some kind of big promotion campaign. I personally have always disagreed with that strategy. It's not that I disagree with development. I'm all for development, as long as it's the development that people in that country actually want. I think sometimes we forget that, the main people that projects are supposed to be working for, are supposed to serve, are the people in the countries. But I don't agree with starting from a development standpoint and then hoping that at the last second, some promotion will happen so that all the things that were developed suddenly were deemed a success. It's not logical anyway. If you have a 3-year project and you work and spend a lot of money for 2.5 years just to wait to the last 6 months to hopefully promote it and have some magazines pick up the story, first of all, the success rate of that is really low. Promotion isn't guaranteed anyway. I mean, you can do promotion, but successful promotion is not guaranteed. But to wait until the last second and then everybody stress out and hope that the promotion gets picked up by some magazine is an incredibly illogical way to handle the process. To me, I'm sure many people on this phone call disagree with that. And I'm actually not in the business to make sure that everybody agrees with me. I'm just in the business to be as honest as possible. I'm many things, but I am definitely honest. And as most people on this call who know me, I'm incredibly direct, but not for my own purposes. I don't want to be clever. Again, I want to make sure that somebody is seeing it from a different perspective and saying it. So most people work in the industry by thinking that development and then promoting it equals success. At the very least, in my opinion, it should be that development plus promotion based in storytelling here equals success. Not just promotion, not just, hey, we built this, hey, we trained some people, hey, we're meeting with whoever and then promoting it and saying, good project, let's go. For me, at the very least, it needs to be development based on storytelling, and that storytelling then influences the promotion. That's the very least. For me personally, the equation is this: storytelling has to be first. Why? Because storytelling is the fundamental aspect of what a country, what a destination is. It's not based on a foreigner's view of what needs to be developed here. It starts with a local's view of what the strengths of that destination are, and then deciding how to communicate that to the world. Bosnia and Herzegovina has very specific and unique strengths. It does not make sense for us to create a campaign based on other strengths. There are, as we all know, a lot of places people can go on vacation and can go on holiday. What we're trying to do is essentially differentiate Bosnia for its strengths, the things that make it unique, so that people can make truthful and honest decisions about where they want to go enjoy their travel. We don't need to compete with Bali or France or Japan or America or China or South Africa about how tourism looks. They have their own versions of it. Nobody else can be a better Bosnia and Herzegovina than Bosnia and Herzegovina. Full stop. So let's start with the story that Bosnia and Herzegovina has. And from that, development happens. And the beauty of that is if you start with storytelling, the promotion has basically already been done for you. You have the stories already ready to go for the media, for social media, for any kind of campaign, for tourism fairs, for brochures, for maps, for whatever you've got. There's no use in doing the development first and then getting to the end and scrambling to put all that stuff together. Let's start thinking about what the storytelling is from the beginning, put that stuff together, let the development happen from where it makes the most sense to develop Bosnia's uniqueness. And then the beauty is success is inevitable. If you start from what your natural strengths are, if you start from a position of knowing that nobody is ever in the history of humankind is ever going to be a better Bosnia and Herzegovina than Bosnia and Herzegovina, you've already won. You can't, you literally can't fail. Nobody's ever going to be better at that than you. But if you try to be a different version of another country, then you've already lost and you will inevitably fail. Maybe not today, but you will fail. Because real sustainability comes from knowing what your story is, knowing how to tell the world, and owning it so that people want to come for your unique brand of tourism. If you don't do that, if you follow foreign trends, you may have success for a couple of years, but you will always eventually fail. And I use the word always intentionally. If you need an example, we can just go back to the last 2 years. Every country that was dealing with tourism from a standpoint of hoping that foreign trends would work in their favor failed. When there were no more influencers that could travel around, when there were no more OTAs, groups that would support booking your hotel room, foreign companies that book your hotel rooms, foreign hotels that closed down because it's no longer profitable to stay open in Bosnia and Herzegovina, basically ruined tourism for the last 2 years, right? And that's because the world was based on a fairly superficial definition of what success in tourism means. It's time now to redefine that based on what you have, not on other people, on what you have. Okay, enough said about that. My approach, again, is going to be different than what most people think. You didn't have me on here today so that I could just repeat what everybody else always says. I'm not a parrot in this way. Again, you don't need to agree with me. This is just my opinion. But my guess is it's at least healthy for us to have a conversation. I do not believe that the tourists are the kings and queens of tourism. I'm not one of those that believe in the old American saying that the customer is always right. It makes sense for you to make the customer comfortable, sure, just like you would in any guest that came over to your house. Anybody who came over to your house, you'd make them feel comfortable. But they're not going to tell you what to cook that night. You're going to decide what you cook based on what you like to cook. It's the same with tourism. The destination has to be the main star in your play. It's not the people who come visit, because people may come and visit for a week, 2 weeks, whatever, and enjoy it and love it. But they don't live in Bosnia. They enjoyed their time in Bosnia, but let's just get to the truth here. They don't care about Bosnia. They care that it's a place that they could potentially come visit again in the future. They don't care about Bosnia and Herzegovina. They have their own lives. You care about Bosnia and Herzegovina. It is you who matter, not the tourist. The good news here is when you matter and your destination matters the most, you also start to attract the right kind of tourists. If you're attracting people because you're changing your style of life to attract other people to think that you're cool, you've lost the plot. Popularity contests are cheap, Those things don't last very long. Again, tourism needs to serve the destination. The destination should not serve tourism. You are all the guardians of Bosnia and Herzegovina, not any single tourist. We hope they have a good time when they come to Bosnia and Herzegovina. If they don't, okay. I mean, it's just the way it goes. You can't please everybody. But if you stay true to yourself, you will start to gain the level of sustainability that's necessary so that you can succeed distantly into the future. That is sustainability. Believing in what you do, understanding that your story is the true one, making the destination the most important part of this equation, and then believing it. Not just saying that you believe, but believing it. Understanding that you're making the rules. I know that that's hard for some folks, and I know that this sounds like a lot of project talk, but I fundamentally believe it's the same thing with just humans, but I mean, especially with destinations, understanding that what you have to say is the most important and then believing that and being confident, instantly that one step makes the country significantly more sustainable. People use the word authenticity a lot, but they do because it sounds good and it's a great word to have in project proposals. Authenticity and sustainability, all those words that people write down. But real authenticity happens when you actually are true to yourself, not just saying that you're authentic. People and places don't have to say they're authentic if they're authentic. They don't. There's no reason to say I'm authentic if you are authentic. You're too busy being authentic. Doesn't make any sense. Be who you are. Don't let anybody else get in the way of that. What does an integrated story first process do for you? Well, first of all, it serves the destination first, as we've just said. Second of all, it never goes out of date. So when you are true to yourself, that's not a trend. That's something you never lose. And I'm going to say something here that I always say, but I want to make sure that it is understood because it is the fundamental building block of this entire workshop. Everybody here already has everything that they need to succeed. The country of Bosnia and Herzegovina already has everything it needs to succeed. If not one more hotel was built, if no more workshops were given, if nothing was spent in the way of projects or support, you would already have everything that you would ever need to succeed. Because you already have an inheritance of heritage and tradition that was given to you by your parents, and it was given to them by their parents and their parents and their parents and on into when Slavic people first came to the Balkan Peninsula. So 7th century. That's how long the tradition here has been built. The issue is, can you tap into that to make what you already possess? That's the good news. You don't need to spend money. You've already got it. Now, you may want to figure out how to make it more understandable to the outside world. But what you need to succeed, you already have. How do you then make it easier to understand for the world traveler? Like I always say as well, I think that there is this thought that foreigners want to be treated in some kind of special way. You know, they need to stay in 5-star hotels and they need to drink bottled water or whatever. They don't. Nobody needs to drink bottled water in Bosnia. The water's the best in the world. And they don't want to stay in 5-star hotels. They want to see the things that make Bosnia real. They want to see what Bosnia and Herzegovina does that's real. They want to see your grandmother make bread. They want to see her pull burek out and show the process of how it was made. I know a lot of folks have a hard time understanding that. They think that the foreigners want something different. They don't. They want the stuff that makes Bosnia and Herzegovina real. That is your goal, is to take what Bosnia and Herzegovina does correctly and real, because it's theirs, because it's yours, and then portray that to the world, not some foreign version of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I know I keep repeating this, but it's that important. They don't want a foreign version of your country. They want your country. When you rely on yourself, you get that realness. Now we're starting to get into a little bit of what is necessary for foreign for travel writers from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Why is it important for locally based journalism and storytelling? Why is it important that people in the audience here start to replace people like me? And let me state that again. It is important for people in Bosnia and Herzegovina to start replacing me, right? My job as a consultant, anyway, with these projects is to basically work myself out of a job. I need to, if I'm doing my job honestly, I'm doing it well enough so that the people here who are listening will understand how to do this as well as I do so that they can replace me. Why is that important? It's important for a whole lot of reasons. But first of all, again, I really enjoy Bosnia and Herzegovina. It holds a very close spot in my heart. But I'm never going to be Bosnian, ever. I could spend the rest of my life there and I won't be Bosnian. I don't know the fundamental things that people in the audience here grew up with. I didn't experience the way it feels as a kid to walk to school and to stop by my grandmother's apartment to, you know, sit with her in the afternoon and to know what people were joking about in the street and to understand the political situation on a fundamental level and to understand all the different foods and, you know, I mean, obvious things. I love the region. I'm never going to be Balkan. It's important that people who are going to come to Bosnia and Herzegovina hear what the country is actually like, not just from people like me, but from people who actually know what it feels like to be there. I think it's okay for foreigners to cover travel. Obviously, it's the way I've made a living for my entire life. However, I don't think it should be the only way that travelers hear about destinations. A good example here is I did a story for a publication recently that spoke of the need for exactly this, to have people who were from destinations be the primary journalists for their destinations. And the larger point was that if you allow foreign journalists like me to cover most of, if not all of the stories, you get what you get, because the fact of the matter is I'm an odd person in this profession. Most of the time in my professional life, I've spent in and around the Balkans. I've, of course, covered stories all over the world, but the place that I have spent the most time is by far the Balkans, by far. It is a place that always fascinated me. I've always thought it was beautiful. I enjoy the complications of it. I enjoy the complexity of it. I adore the landscape. It's just a place that I've always loved covering. But most journalists aren't like me. Most people foreign journalists will come on some press trip or whatever reason they come, because they were sponsored or whatever, or they just come on their own, whatever. And they spend 5 days there. And then they write a story that gets published about Bosnia and Herzegovina that stays on websites and on Google for literally the rest of our lives. They're doing promotion about your country that becomes the promotion of record, whether you agree with it or not, for the rest of our lives. Two good examples. One is there was a story a handful of years ago about cycling on the Chiro Trail in Herzegovina. And, you know, it ran in a very big publication. And the headline of that story said the word landmines. It was something like riding bicycles in Bosnia and Herzegovina through landmines or something. I forget what it said, but they said the word landmine in the headline of the story. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is a foreigner who certainly wasn't there during the war and has no right to talk about the war. No right. Nobody who wasn't there and isn't from Bosnia and Herzegovina has a right to base a travel story on something they have no idea about. Still, that story mentioned landmines in the headline, a story about bicycling. So what happens? I remember having communications with people, friends of mine in Bosnia and Herzegovina during the time. And somebody forwarded it to me and said, look how great it is. We got a story about cycling. And I was like, okay, yeah, but the first word in the story was about the war and about landmines. So now people can't just cycle in Bosnia and enjoy it. They have to connect that to landmines and war that they never participated in, that happened 25 years ago. I mean, how dare them? Shame on them. But the larger point is not that that person was trying to be a bad person who wrote the story. They don't know any better. They're not from Bosnia and Herzegovina. And they've been given the ability to then create the promotion campaign for Bosnia and Herzegovina for the rest of our lives. They have they've connected cycling and landmines to the overall public about Bosnia and Herzegovina forever. My guess is a local person would not have written that story like that. In fact, I'm certain of it. Nobody would have purposely perpetuated what is already misperception of the entire region, but especially Bosnia and Herzegovina, by talking in the first paragraph, in the first headline even, about the war. The second example is when I was doing research for that story about local journalism, what I found is that if I Googled Bosnia travel stories, Bosnia and Herzegovina travel stories, first of all, almost all of them are written by publications that come out of either the US or the UK, which is what it is. It's where many, many travel stories come from. There are, of course, many places in the world that have a developed travel media industry: Holland, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, South America, South Africa, India, America, United States, Canada, UK. But they're really concentrated in these places. The rest of the world just has to take what foreign journalists provide the public about the places that they visit. Something like, I don't know, out of 3 or 4 pages of Google stories about travel in Bosnia and Herzegovina, like 90% of them were from either the UK or the US. The more frightening thing to me is something like 3/4 of them. I'm making these numbers up a little bit, but I did the math at the time and it was accurate. Something like 75% of them mention the word war in connection to travel in Bosnia and Herzegovina today, meaning these last couple of years, in the first or second paragraph of the story. Again, why do they do that? Because they want the cheap drama of making the travel seem more dramatic, like they somehow were covering the country during wartime. I mean, I'm not really sure what the purpose is there. But I only know one way to solve this problem, and that is to make sure that people in Bosnia and Herzegovina are in control of the narrative, not foreigners like me, right? Because for most of the folks, they're not doing it. Most of the foreign journalists are not doing it because they're bad people. They're ignorant, like me. Final example I'll give is, even after covering Bosnia for 6 or 7 years, I wrote a story for the Washington Post in like 2006, I'll say. So 16 years ago, where the first paragraph of my story talked about the war. And about a year later, I read that story and I was deeply embarrassed because I was breaking all the rules that I'm now telling you. I was a foreigner, I was in Bosnia, I loved being there, but I couldn't just tell a great story about what it feels like to be in Sarajevo today. I had to mention the war. Why did I do that? It's because I didn't know any better. I wasn't sensitive enough. I didn't understand how hurtful that can be, to combine things that I know nothing about just for the cheap drama on a travel story that will live on the internet forever. If that's something that a local person wanted to write about, okay, that's their business. They have the right to do that. A foreigner doesn't get that opportunity. They shouldn't get that opportunity. They do get that opportunity. They shouldn't get that opportunity. So long story short, the only way I know to solve that problem is for people in country to take control of the narrative. That's why this is so important. It's important for folks who actually know what Bosnia and Herzegovina's authentic image is to provide it. Not somebody like me who's approximating it, but somebody who actually has lived it. It's important because people in the country know what businesses are important to tourism in Bosnia, more than a guy who's just going to be there for a week and then leave. People who live with it, they know what works and what doesn't. That helps to drive economic development. We've already established that if you are in control of the story that the world knows about you, then you have already become more sustainable because you're the one who's setting the rules about what it means to be in Bosnia and Herzegovina, not somebody who's been there for 1 week. When you control the narrative and you control what you show the world that you're proud about, you become sustainable. That's the first step. It's not just checking off a list of I recycle, we make sure we don't use, single-use plastic, blah, blah, blah. I mean, those are very, very, not blah, blah, blah. Those are very, very important, extremely important. But when you're talking about sustainability at its core, it's when a country takes control of its own narrative. So what is travel writing and how can we do this in this situation? Well, first of all, what I want to do today is I want to help start to change the myth about what it means to be a travel writer. Most folks think that it's just me, somebody like me, hanging out on vacation. I eventually go to a different country and write a story and turn it in, and somebody pays for me to do that. And to be honest with you, there are journalists who are like that. There are journalists who get paid, they take press trips, and they're sponsored to go visit places. I don't do that personally. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a horrible thing, but I think it's important for us to understand the distinction. When you take a press trip and some hotel has sponsored your visit, you are obligated to write a story that mentions that hotel. That hotel might be horrible, but you're obligated now because you accepted that trip. You've accepted the gift, and now you have to repay the gift. Why is that bad? Well, it doesn't have to be bad, but the fact of the matter is, when you do that, you no longer represent a pure traveler. You're now part of the promotion mechanism of tourism. You're basically running an advertisement for that hotel. That, again, in and of itself isn't horrible, but it's not pure travel. So if I'm writing a story about Bosnia and Herzegovina and a hotel company brought me over and I have to write about that hotel, and probably am writing about other things that that hotel has suggested, then I'm not doing the hard work of doing pure, objective travel journalism. I'm not doing the hard work of making sure that the experience that the reader, the future traveler, will have will be really like mine. Because if I'm being brought over by a hotel company, I'm definitely getting special treatment. If I get special treatment, I no longer represent the reader. I represent the hotel. Now, the person may learn a lot about Bosnia and Herzegovina in that story, and that's a good thing. And so, you know, the world is different now, and we have different levels of ability to travel. Publications don't really pay for travel like they used to. It used to be that publications paid for your travel to make sure that you stayed objective. There's not that kind of money anymore because there's just the need for too much content. That world pretty much changed when journalism went from print to online. And I started in print. Most of my career was spent in print. And when everything changed to online, my life had to change too. I still don't take those kinds of trips that get sponsored by hotels because I've never been comfortable feeling obligated to write about that hotel. My purpose here is to hopefully provide readers to do an experience like they can actually do like mine, not just one that I'm pretending like they can do this like mine. But if there's no money for people to travel, we're going to have to rely on that kind of sponsorship, and that's not going away. So you can't really make a decision not to do it, but it's important for you to understand why it exists like that. And we're not just convincing people. For me, travel journalism isn't just being an influencer that's convincing people to come visit. It's about giving them the real information about why it is that they should spend their vacation this year in Bosnia and Herzegovina instead of France. Why should they be here? Why is it more important for them to spend the time and the money that they have, that they've saved all year so that they can do this in Bosnia and Herzegovina instead of, you know, the UK or the US or Chile or wherever it is they're going to go. And, you know, we have the power by providing this information about changing the dialogue here about travel, about making sure that if we're going to talk about a place being authentic, we actually provide the information that allows readers to understand that, not just to promote it as some kind of, you know, social media post. Big proclamations and social media posts won't solve the problem here. You know, slick marketing campaigns are good if they're based on truth to begin with. If you do a social media or any kind of marketing campaign that is just saying something is great without it actually knowing what its real story is yet, it's a potential double negative, because not only have you not done the hard work of figuring out what your story is, but you have basically sold a product to somebody who's going to come and they're going to realize you haven't actually developed that product yet. And they're going to go home to their friends and say, don't bother. You know, they said it was this, it's not that. They haven't done that yet. They've just figured out how to market it. And that kind of consumer interaction with a product is the worst kind. It's the one you don't want. Travel journalism as a genre is the most diverse. It's basically a catch-all for a lot of different genre of journalism. Yes, I know that it's not as important as political journalism or a lot of other kinds of journalism, but it's the only one I know that really has the chance to immediately affect your life. So if you read something that you like, if somebody reads something that they like about Bosnia and Herzegovina, you may actually change their lives. You may actually give them the information that influences them to spend their 2-week vacation this year and the money that they've saved for it to go to Bosnia. I don't know many other forms of journalism that can have a direct influence on the way somebody will actually plan their year. And it touches on lots of different areas. It touches on culture, you know, lots of different areas of journalism, culture, music, the personality of a destination. Sometimes it can even be political and give different aspects of what is happening in the country and why that makes it more interesting to travel to. It can go across a whole range of different when you're a good travel journalist, you're thinking about all of those things. You're thinking about what travel to this place means, how it was possible, what it means to the person who's reading, all the different aspects of the destination that make it possible for it to be authentic. You're not just saying the place is beautiful and then saying you should go visit. You're actually taking the time to figure out what are the components of that destination that make it a good travel story. And of course, it educates. People will learn more about, even a bad story about Bosnia and Herzegovina will at least give them some information, as opposed to before they read the story. And just as a little bit of an example here, years ago, I wrote a story about a city, and I happened to be in that city because I was living there, Zagreb, and I was living in that city. And after the story came out, it was in the New York Times, I was eating in a restaurant that I had included in the story. The owners of the restaurant didn't know that I was the one who wrote the story. I never introduced myself to them. I wasn't allowed to take a free meal, so it's better for me not to even introduce myself. And the two people at this table next to me was an older American couple, and they were at the restaurant. And what did they do? While they were eating the meal, the husband took the story that I had written out of his back pocket, put it on the table, didn't know that they never talked to me, put it on the table, and were checking off the things that I had suggested that they should do in Zagreb. Well, that gave me a very quick lesson in how important travel journalism is. I definitely wrote about the places that I thought were good places for people to enjoy in Zagreb. But I had never yet put myself in the position of what it actually meant for somebody to plan their vacation based on what I said. From that moment on, I was absolutely positive I needed to make sure that the things that I covered were actual quality and were correct, because I have the ability to change the way people spend their vacations and thus potentially change their lives. So, I don't want to make my role in life too dramatic here, but it's important stuff. I mean, it's more than just, hey, you should visit Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's, hey, this is what we really have to offer. And when you come, you have the ability to potentially improve your life. So it's important. The travel journalism takes on multiple different versions here. And one of it is narrative driven. That's the kind of story where somebody asked me to come. An editor asked me to go to Sarajevo and give my impressions of what it felt like to travel there. Others are logistic driven. Let's say, for instance, like that story I did for the New York Times about Zagreb. It was one of those stories. It was a 36-hour story, if you've ever seen one of those, but and I've also done one of those for Sarajevo. It's one of those stories where, at 9 a.m. I say you should go eat here. At 11, you should go to this museum. At 12, at noon, you should go eat lunch here, blah, 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 blah. Anyways, 2.5, 3 days, because I know it's 36 hours, but it's actually more like an entire weekend of what you should do. Right? That's logistics driven. I'm giving you a plan for what you should do based on time and based on my research. And then you have journalism that is more like a PR tool, meaning that publication has communicated with the destination, and the destination has said, we're willing to advertise in your magazine. However, we need to have, XYZ number of travel pieces in your publication, right? So it still can be objective journalism, but the reason that they are covering this place in this magazine is because they've been paid to do so. And let's not make any mistake. All travel journalism has the potential to be PR marketing tools. I mean, I've never covered a story about a destination where the people in that tourism organization didn't immediately the next day use it in social media posts and so forth and so on. It's part of the process of covering a story, is that it will be used for promotion. I still have to be as objective as possible, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to be a PR tool. Publications that do this often. The New York Times is one that often does both these kind of logistic and also narrative stories. Their stories are often more kind of news-based, which I like personally. Lonely Planet, which I write for regularly, they do kind of guide stuff, but the magazine articles that I write still have kind of that feel to them, which is okay with me. I want people to get the most that they can out of a story so that they can go, not because I want them to be impressed by anything that I've done. That's the last thing that I want. An old journalism professor of mine used to say, when you're traveling, travel like you're looking through the window instead of looking into the mirror. Because at the end of the day, nobody really cares what you did. I mean, I know that it's important to you, but it's not important to anybody else. They want to feel like they are there, right? So Lonely Planet does a kind of a guide thing. And, in the old days, National Geographic used to do kind of a combo. They certainly have, it's very promotion and those kinds of things are very important, of course, there. But, they've always been a place that really looks deeper into culture. And again, it's a really nice place to work for because they have a deeper sense of culture. And working with publications. Here's another word for folks who are learning the language of the business. Pubs. It's not a place where you go drink, although there are pubs where you drink, of course. A pub in journalism speak is a publication. It's what we call them. People will ask you what pubs you write for. The tone that you write with, so we're getting into some of the nuts and bolts aspect of what it means to write travel stories. The tone that you write, the tone in which you write for different pubs will change. I know, for instance, when I'm writing a story for the New York Times, that it is a slightly drier, more news tone, which I personally like. I like that, hitting it off with a very flat but informative sentence and then going into description, as opposed to, something that's more flowery. I prefer to hit it with a easy to understand, get to the point kind of sentence. Working with publications also means that you need to find the right sources to tell the story that you're telling. That changes from publication to publication, but that's part of your goal. Most of these stories, you're not just being asked to just give your opinion. That's not actually being a journalist, that's being a blogger, which is also fine, but that's a different thing. Blogging doesn't necessitate being edited by another person. If you're a blogger, you're probably editing yourself, which is also great. But if the difference for me between journalist and blogger is self-edited. A journalist is one who is edited by somebody who works at that publication. You need to have sources. Even if you're from the place that you are covering, you need to have sources because it lends the authority to what you're talking about. It also gives a different cadence, a different pacing to the story so that the reader is not just listening to your voice, which is one of the reasons why we're having a guest speaker in the second half of this, is so you can break up my voice a little bit. Come up with the reason that you've had the story idea and why it's good for this publication. We're going to talk about this in the second half. You need to understand the publication that you're pitching. Pitching is proposing a story again. Understand the pub that you're pitching. Meaning, don't pitch a story to a publication that they're not going to run and that is not appropriate for them. Don't pitch a story about mountaineering to a sailing magazine. It's not just that it's a waste of their time. You will forever be somebody whose email address that they just instantly forget about because they know you didn't take the time to understand their publication well enough before you pitched them. And these formalities matter. Editors remember this stuff. Be a professional. At the end of the day, you're a business person selling another business person a product. Pretend like you're selling them these pins, like this one that I have here that's now in blur. I'm a person who sells these pins for a living, right? And I'm going to a store where they sell pins. I want them to carry my pins and put them on the shelf in their store. I have to go into that business, talk to the owner and say, these pins are great. And I make the best pins that I know of because I have a long history of making them. And here's an example of the way that I make this pin. They always work, and I can always get them to you on time when you need them. If you work with me, I will guarantee you professionalism and that I will sell you and deliver the product that I promise. That's essentially what you're doing when you're selling a story. You're saying to an editor, you have a magazine, a store. I want to put my product, my story, on your shelf in your magazine. That's essentially what we're saying. When I do that, I promise you that I'm somebody who knows what I'm writing about. I'm going to take the time to include people who are authorities, experts in my story, and I'm going to provide your readers with good information so that they appreciate the kind of products that your store carries. At the end of the day, the editor doesn't really care about you. They want the story to serve their readers. Just like somebody who owns a store doesn't really care about the person who sells the pins. They want that pen, this writing utensil, to work for the people who are coming into their store who want to buy pens. If they start selling bad pens, then people are going to stop coming to the store. If a magazine starts printing or publishing bad stories, people are going to stop listening, stop watching, reading their magazine or visiting their website. It's a business. You need to be professional. Follow through with what you say you're going to do and be available to the editor so that they know that you're the kind of professional they can rely on in the future. If you do that, this is now obviously much of this is as a freelancer, but it works the same if you're on staff somewhere. If you provide solid product and you are reliable to be on time and to be available for questions after you've delivered that product, you will definitely get more work. If you think you're the best writer in the world, but you're not very reliable, they'll use you one time. And then at the end of that one time, they will realize that you're more trouble than you're worth. The world is filled with the best writers in the world who aren't able to actually be professional. It is rarer to find good writers. Like I am, for instance, a good writer. I wouldn't say I was a great writer. I'm a good writer, but I'm reliable. If I tell an editor I'm going to give them something, I give it to them. It's not always perfect. Much of the time they have questions or they tell me that they don't like things in the story, but it's my obligation to be available to them to hear what they have to say and change the story to make it work for their magazine, to make my pen work for their store. I am not more important than the magazine. The destination is not more important than the magazine. I've always called myself basically a glorified researcher. That's essentially what we are. I would suggest to anybody in there, anybody here who cares about this, whether you're starting or whether or not you've been doing it for a little while, get over being a prima donna about what you write. Do a good job, but editors have the right to change what you write, and they will. And you need to let them do it because you're writing for that magazine. The magazine's not serving you. Here's a good example, and we're about 2 or 3 minutes away from going into our first break. I'm going to give you an example that we can take into the next half. Here's a story that I wrote for a couple of different magazines. Bicycling magazine, Lonely Planet wrote this story, or picked up that published this story. And because those two magazines published this story, a whole lot of other magazines, of course, that I wasn't related to, also saw this story and decided that they would publish some form of it, which is great. I mean, it made the product, it made the destination go viral for a few days. But I'm going to give you an example of what I consider to be a decent story. Not decent because I wrote it, but decent because the story idea is easy to understand and because it provides real information for the reader. This is also something that we can start to use as you start to come up with your ideas for your 3 ideas that will eventually become 1 idea at the end of the workshop. So the idea of this story was that Bike Slovenia Green is the title of this product that Slovenia as a country through their Slovenia Tourist Board created. They created it to provide a route, a cycling route for travelers or locals to be able to cycle from the northern part of the country, Kranjska Gora, down the western half through the Socha Valley and so forth and so on to the Adriatic, to Koper. Along the way, it stops in 7 different destinations. The 7 different destinations have all been certified green. They all passed the 100 criteria it's necessary, which are difficult criteria. The 100 criteria necessary to get a green certification. This is something that Bosnia and Herzegovina is trying to do right now, by the way. Look into it. This would be a good story for a lot of journalists out there. Bosnia and Herzegovina right now is trying to implement this green certification campaign with destinations, with businesses, and this will be great for Bosnia and Herzegovina. That's my opinion, but this is a good story, and everybody in the audience now knows about it. Go do some research. Communicate with me at the end of this if you want to. I'm going to put my information at the end to communicate. Feel free to talk shop, to be colleagues and communicate in the future about this stuff. But this is a good story. So just to move on with it, these 7 places are connected for this cycling route. It's the first ever time in the history of routes, of trails, whether it's hiking or cycling or any other kind of route, where every single place on the route is green certified, right? Why is this a good story? Why is this a good story to pitch to an editor? First of all, it's easy to understand. We start one place, we end another place. Along the way, you're going to see villages and towns that most people don't get a chance to see because they only go to a few of the normal places. They're going to eat good food, they're going to drink good wine, and all of the places along the way are green certified. Easy to understand. Took me about 10 seconds to just tell it to you there. It was a very brief pitch that I had to make to editors. They understood the quality of the story immediately. And it's something that visitors, travelers immediately get great information. They immediately get to understand Slovenia better. And this story proposal has a unique quality because not only are the destinations unique, not only is it helping to tell the story, the real story of Slovenia, but it also has something that's never happened before. This is the first time that a trail has connected green destinations. So it was easy for an editor to understand that it's an easy concept, to understand it's the first time that something happened, to understand that it provides authentic information about a destination. Why am I telling you all this stuff about Slovenia? Because you could almost take the word Slovenia out of this and put in the word Bosnia and Herzegovina and have the same story. Both of these countries are very similar. And I think that Slovenia has the ability to be a pretty decent model for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Both of them have beautiful mountains. Both of them have a coastline. Both of them have incredible rivers and lakes. Both of them have incredible culture, cool towns, nice villages, nice cities. This is a good example of not just a good product from a tourism operation and from a DMO. This is a great story. And this is a good story because it has those components. These are the kinds of components that you're looking for when you're coming up with story ideas to pitch to editors. If you're a DMO or a tourism operator out there who are listening, these are the kinds of things that journalists need to know so that they have a better chance of convincing their editor to run this story. because it's not just you that needs to convince the journalist, it's the journalist that needs to convince the editor. The easier you can make it for the journalist to convince the editor, the more likely it is that that story gets published. And it's not just a little bit more likely, it's like 100 times more likely. It may even be more than that. The easier you make it for them, the easier it is to get it published. So here we are. We're getting ready to take our only break. And let's think about what we're doing here. This is our exercise. 3 pitchable story ideas is what we're hoping for. Is what the exercise is. Here's some things to think about while you're coming up. You should have already been writing some things down. If you haven't, take a moment to do it while we take our break. But again, this is for you. It's not for me. If you decide you don't want to do it, it's fine. But you might as well start this process if it's something you want to do in the future. Think about some of the things that these good story ideas do. You know, they mention a destination, but maybe it's part of a destination that other people haven't heard of. Everybody's heard of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Maybe there's something specific about one of the regions in Bosnia and Herzegovina that people don't know about that would make them interested on their next trip. Again, you're the experts, not me. I know the components that an editor will want to see, but I don't know Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's your expertise. Is it something that's new now, like that Bike Slovenia Green had? That was the first time that there had been a trail that incorporated 7 green destinations, or all green destinations. What's happening? Is there an anniversary that's happening in the country? Is it 100 years since whatever? Is Livno having its festival for the 50th time, or Travnik, or Banja Luka, or Bihać, or Sarajevo, or Trebinje, or what? Who is doing what that is an anniversary this year? Who's doing what that's a new offer, a new thing that's being launched in the city? What would make a good travel story? What would make something that people should know about? Is there a particularly old culture that people don't know about? Maybe in Folcha, they cook something specific that most people don't know about. Maybe there's something about Sevda that most people don't know about. People in the world don't know about that music. People in the region, of course, do. That's a good story. If you can combine music with food and adventure and present it to an editor with the right kind of newness to it, and people want to know more about this part of the world, that's a good story idea. Think about now, even before you start to write the story, because you don't write the story when you send it to an editor, you just send the pitch. We'll talk about that later, but that's important. You don't need to write the story first. In fact, they don't want the story first. They want the pitch. Go ahead and think about who you would be using for your authorities. Who are your sources, as they say? Who are the people you're going to quote? Those are your sources. Think about the kind of images that might work for this. I'm personally not a particularly great photographer. I wish that I was. I'm sure that there are many people out there who are great photographers, and also they write as well. That makes you a double threat. That's great. Think about the kind of images that a publication would want to see with these stories. Think about who your audience is. Who are you writing this for? What is the publication? Do you understand the publication that you're pitching the story to? And again, just to say it, for the 10th time, it needs to be easy to understand, because most of these editors, they're not going to, take an hour reading your pitch. They need to take a minute. They need to understand what it is that you're pitching to them straight away. If they like it a lot, they'll move to the second paragraph in your pitch. Your pitch doesn't need to be more than about 3 or 4 paragraphs, though. So, they need to understand what it is that you're pitching them straight away. It needs to be very easy. It needs to be a real easy decision for them. So it doesn't need to be a complicated idea. It needs to be easy to understand. If you can take some of these things into account, it will help your process of coming up with 3 ideas, which, remember, we're going to reduce down to 1 by the end. With that, we're going to take a break. It is now 10 after 9. Let's all gather back here in exactly 10 minutes, 20 after 9. Excuse me, it's 20 after 9 my time. It's 20 after 3 o'clock in the afternoon for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Let's meet again let's just make it Easy. 9:23. That way everybody knows. I'm starting sharp at 9:23. Everybody's on synchronized time with their phones anyway. I know that 9:23 or 3:23 is the same for you as it is for everybody else. We're starting immediately after that, and we're going to talk about the business of travel writing. So I will see you all then. We're starting sharply when I get back at 9:23 or 3:23. Okay. Thank you all again. See you in a bit. Bye-bye. Why did I choose 923? I don't know. I felt like that was a number of people, or 323. I felt like that was a number people could remember. Anybody on the Turizam side, is my audio and everything working fine? Can you hear me?
Zdravo, Alex. Dan, tu smo iz projekta, slušamo te, pomne.
Yes. Hi, Alex. We are here from the project. We are listening to you very carefully.
Oh, wow. Well, God bless you. Hello again to everybody. I reckon we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm not sure. I see here with some people on the chat that some people can't hear, but I'm assuming that I can be heard. Obviously, everybody just answered me. So if you can't hear me, first of all, that might be a positive for you. But second of all, if you can't hear me, maybe click off and click back on again. Let's get into the story here in the second half of the workshop. In about 15 minutes, I'm going to have a guest come on, and I'll introduce her when she comes on. But in the meantime, let's get a few things accomplished so that what she has to say has a little bit more value. We've moved on to the story aspect. And we're talking about story steps. Some of this may be a little bit rudimentary, a little bit elementary for some of you, especially people who are already longtime journalists. Just bear with me. I'll say that it's important sometimes to get a refresher in some of these things. I like to attend workshops sometimes just to hear what people are talking about, even though I probably know some of it. It's always nice to get a refresher. Talking about coming up with a story idea. I guess potentially in a way, this is the most important part. I mean, there's a lot of things that are important, but as I said before, I'm a good writer. I'm a good travel writer. And I would call myself a solid travel writer. I know a lot of travel writers who are a whole lot better than I am. And of course, there's people who haven't been doing it as long, so they're not quite as confident as I am. But I'm solid. And what I mean when I say that isn't just to say that I'm good or bad, is to say there's a lot of people at my level of travel writing who can essentially do the same thing. Most of the people who are my peers, they write basically as well as I do. So the thing that then needs to differentiate me from them is my story idea, right? If we're all basically accomplishing it, if we're all basically accomplished enough to do something well, then the difference becomes, what are we doing? And in this case, story ideas are golden. That is the business. Coming up with a story idea that you're pitching to an editor is the business. So you hold on to it like it's, the last thing on earth. It's the thing that I am most precious about. It's the thing that in my younger days as a competitive person was particularly secretive about. I'm less that way now because, now it's not as important to me to write as many stories as I can. It's more important for me to think about travel in an intelligent and responsible way. And write occasionally. Of course, I still write. But I'm also more helpful, I would say, than I used to be. Wasn't that I wasn't helpful before, but I was in business for myself. I needed to make sure my ideas worked. I like to talk to people about the ideas that they're working on to help them. I think of us all now as a team. Brainstorm. So here's some steps you can take for getting into that mode of getting good story ideas. Brainstorm with tourism operators that who are developing interesting products that can show off your region, show off Bosnia and Herzegovina in a way that you like. A lot of the products that I'm drawn to kind of combine adventure and food, or adventure and culture, or adventure, food, culture, blah, blah, blah. And that's because I gravitate, my personality gravitates towards that. I like hiking and I like cycling, and everybody loves to eat good food, and the food in Bosnia-Herzegovina is particularly good. So is the wine. So there's a lot of elements there that you can work with. Luckily, that's also kind of the golden reader. I mean, that's the bullseye for the reader, is that person that's, I'm going to use big amounts of age here, but let's just say 30 to 50, 30 to 60 people who are still active. They want to go do some adventure, but they are going to spend a little bit of money while they're there. They're not completely a budget traveler, and they want to drink a glass of nice wine at the end of a day of hiking or cycling. It's kind of like this golden traveler for both the tourism operator, also for DMOs, and for a lot of the story ideas for magazines. So I gravitate towards that. And there's a handful of tourism operators that I typically check in with. It's not because I want to just advertise what they do. It's because I trust that they have the aesthetic that I like to write about. So you will have yours. Go figure out the tourism operators who you admire and that they do the kind of culture that you're both proud of and also that you like to write about. It's important to like this, by the way. If you don't like this, don't do this, because this is way too hard and you're not going to make any money. I mean, it's a whole lifetime of making weird decisions about my career, not based on money, but based on whether or not I enjoy it. Money won't come into it. I don't want to be weird about this, but you need to like what you do. And then once you've talked to those organizations and come up with some ideas that maybe you already know, start to think about who you want to incorporate into the story. Who are the officials? Who are the experts? Who are the authorities that would make for a better story for your readers so that they get more information? Remember, the point here is that the reader is your focus. You want the reader to get the information necessary for them to be better travelers, smarter travelers, potentially more responsible travelers, travelers that respect tradition and culture more, people who understand the destination that you're writing about. It's not about you. Yes, it's nice to get published, but the point here is about making sure that the reader is a better traveler. And then you're writing the story, and we're going to talk about these different things: the structure, the lead, which is essentially another vocabulary word for you if you don't know it. The lead of the story is often the first paragraph or the first sentence even. Basically, it's what gets you in the story. A lot of people have a lot of opinions about how to write a lead. Most of us would probably agree that it's, if not the most important part of the story, it's very close, because this is the way you decide as a reader if you want to stay reading the story. Talk about voice and tone and how that needs to match with the publication you work with. And then, working with editors, which is a really huge part of the business. It's not just huge, it is the fundamental part of the business. We can all write. Working with editors to get it published is the point that we're all sitting now on this workshop. Finding the idea. Again, it comes down to some of those lists that we just talked about before the break. Is this a destination that others haven't heard of? Or let me reframe this, because it doesn't have to be quite that dramatic. Maybe it's a destination that people have heard of, but there's an aspect of it that they don't know anything about, right? Maybe, there's a village in Herzegovina that is that has a specific festival with a specific food that's served and customs and music that, yes, serves the purpose of telling the story of that village. But by writing about that village in that way with those different components, you then have as a reader, a really interesting insight into Herzegovina generally. And then you're more likely to want to come there, and also then more likely to travel to the entire country of Bosnia and Herzegovina. If you can start to combine some of those elements with something that makes it what we would say timely, that has a news peg, Peg is another vocabulary word for everybody keeping track. A peg is something that the story hangs on, just like you would put your hat on a hook. We also call it a peg. It's what your story hangs on. There are time pegs, meaning something is happening now that you need to know about. It's the 100th anniversary of this festival in Herzegovina, for instance. That's a time peg. It gives you a reason to cover the story now. And then there's also news pegs. Maybe something has happened recently that makes the story particularly newsworthy. An event happens that people are starting to come to that part of Europe, and then they want to come to the Balkans because of whatever, and then they really need to come. It's like during the annual Balkan festival, people will be coming from all over the world to visit Western Balkans and to learn more. And while you do so, you need to make sure you take advantage of your time by coming to Bosnia and Herzegovina. News pegs, time pegs, sometimes they can be both. Oftentimes they're both. Is this something new that you can report? This is basically what the point is there, because what an editor is almost always going to say is, why are we doing this story now? What's the purpose? Because remember, they're having to put products into their store. They don't care how beautiful you say the place is. They need to know why they're doing the story now. Every place is beautiful. Everybody thinks that their place is beautiful. So why is it worth us taking the time to put this in our magazine now? Research. When you're writing the story, you've come up with your story idea. Let's just go with this. Let's just go with a route. From what I understand, I'll just throw it out there, because from what I understand in some kind of back and forth conversations with folks at Turizam, they will eventually be launching something that looks like a wine route. Great. Super. I don't really know what that is. I hope I'm not giving anything away, but it makes for a really good example. A new wine route of some sort through the country does multiple things in it, and routes always make good stories, because it's easy to explain to an editor where the route begins and where it ends. It's easy to explain the theme of the route, in this case, wine. And then you have a vehicle for explaining an entire area of tradition, right? Most people who have been there obviously know how good wine can be from Herzegovina. But most people who haven't been to the Balkans, they don't know about that. That's a great story, right? Especially if there's a route that's combining several different vineyards. Then you have multiple things. You have the reader gets basically a value-added product. They get multiple things. They get multiple places to learn about. They get multiple foods to learn about. They have a trip planned for them in one way or another. And it's new. That kind of route would be new. It really fits all the parameters. I'm giving you guys these ideas. You should all fight for them to figure out who's going to write these stories. And you can all write these stories. It just would be different for everybody. When I do this, if I'm pitching a story to an editor, I come up with this idea. Let's just say we came up with the wine route idea, which is a great idea, by the way. And please write it. I do the light research that I need to do to find out, for instance, is that route actually going to happen? And when I figure out that it's actually going to happen, then I start thinking about pitching it to an editor. I do the light research. The light research would be like, okay, where does this route go? Which are the 5 communities that it's going through? What is the kind of food that you would eat along the way? Is it something you can cycle? Is it something you can hike? I don't know, but just figuring out the different components here. And the light early research is essentially so that I can develop a pitch to give to an editor. The pitch is super important to this process, because not only is it going to be how the editor decides if you are going to get the story assignment, but it's also a good moment for you to start summarizing what you want to say in this, right? So when you start to do that stuff, you're putting together the information that you're going to use as the pitch. When you get the assignment, then you start doing a heavier amount of research. You go to the route itself. You talk to the people at the different vineyards. You communicate with them about why their wine is different, what the food's being served there. Is there music in these different places? What are the different places, the different restaurants people will want to eat? Are there places that people want to go that have, are there parks there? Is there some specific place to stay that's iconic? Start to do the deeper research that you're actually doing, not just for yourself in the story, but for future travelers. Find those sources that you need to find. Find those experts. The person who owns the vineyard. Great. It's a great person to interview. Why this route will make tourism better for them. You know, that's a good quote. I want to know why this route will change things. It'd be great if you could get somebody who's actually done part of the route. Maybe you travel with somebody who's super smart and just likes wine and, you know, is going along to be objective, and then you can ask them questions. I mean, it's just, you know, that's a great story to research because, you know, imagine how much fun that is, figuring out the story and then traveling for a week on a wine route. And then for me, I take meticulous notes while I'm doing that. I keep a notebook on me that I then use to cover what I'm writing. And I'm going to show you an example of this. If you'll give me 1 second. If I have my notebook with me, I'm here again. Did I lose my, now I'm completely blurred. There I am. Can everybody hear me out there? Am I still, is the volume still okay? Turizam, folks?
Čujemo te, Alex, nikakav problem.
We hear you, Alex, no problems.
Super, thank you. So I'll have my notebook with me, and in the front of my notebook, I'm just giving you some kind of hints of the way that I would cover it. You do it your own way, but I actually still write notes personally. And I'll take my notebook and I'll write on it in the front part of the notebook, the places that I'm going to, the details of what it is, the address, the email address, the owner's name, what it looks like. Like I actually go in and I look at the floor, I look at the ceiling, not because I'm inspecting it, because I'm trying to think of details that I'm going to use when I write it. I'm not just writing into a place and saying it's a beautiful room, because that doesn't mean anything. That's an empty phrase. Beauty is different for everybody. I don't even make that judgment. I go in and I look at the place, and then I decide what's on there, what's on the how is the floor made? Is it wooden planks? What's the ceiling like? Is it the big wooden beams? You know, are there big windows that look out to the mountains? Can I see a river running by the place? I describe what's there, and then I let the reader decide if that's beautiful. I don't make that judgment for them. Show, don't tell. That's another classic writing adage. And during that time, I'm writing the exact things I see on the back. So I write that on the front going down. On the back of the notebook going the other direction, I write paragraphs that come to me as I'm traveling, that I see something and I realize this would be a really good way to start this story from this perspective, this moment that I happen to be here right now, of this vineyard with this winemaker cutting the grapes here while somebody else is taking them back to press them, and he's dealing with, and there's tourists that have just come up that want to watch this process, and I'm the writer sitting watching this whole thing, describing this process so that I'm giving the reader a sense of what it means, what it feels like to be here. and to hopefully entice them to want to come themselves. So I'm writing those paragraphs on the back of my notebook because I'm constant on the pages going backwards. So I constantly am, it's like a running commentary of the best ways I might start my story. Constant meticulous notes. And before we get to writing the story, I have a guest has agreed to join us. Christine, are you there? Can you hear me on here?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me.
Hi, I'm glad that you're here. Thank you for being here. Christine is a former editor at National Geographic Travel. She also lived in Bosnia, lived in Sarajevo. Was it 10, 12 years ago? When was that you lived there?
I lived there from 2009 to 2011.
Okay, great. And I'll just, while she's here, I'll go down to this picture, which probably many of you recognize from the old days of Zlatna Rivica. Was an image used in the magazine article that Christine actually edited. This was the first time that we actually, I guess, communicated. You were the editor for this story about Sarajevo. This is an image from that story. Christine has been in the business for a long time, and she also has this really, she's a classic editor. She knows what's necessary. She gets to the point with it, and she also likes the idea of making sure that the best version of a story is presented to a reader, because that's the business of the magazine. The magazine needs to be authoritative about the information that it provides to the people who trust it to do so. She and I have had many conversations about the idea of what makes a good story and what information is needed to get there. One of the things I think that we share in common, before I ask her to introduce herself and provide some information on her end, is the fact that I think both of us are fans of local tourism, of locally based travel writers, because it's a resource that we don't use as often as we could in this industry, and also it provides some real insight that a foreigner like me will, of course, never be able to provide, as much as I'd like to. So if you would mind, Christine, maybe just correct some of my, Christine was my editor too. So, I mean, some of this is, I'm doing my best to introduce my former editor. That's a tough thing. So maybe give us a little bit of information on how I got this wrong. And then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, if you wouldn't mind sticking around for about 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, that sounds great, Alex. Thank you again for having me, and to USAID for organizing this. It's a great opportunity to talk about some of my favorite topics, sustainable travel, pitching, writing, storytelling. And then, as Alex said, this is one of my favorite places in the whole world. Bosnia and Herzegovina, I lived there for 2 years. It was incredibly influential on my life and my career, and I'm really just happy to have this conversation. I will say, Alex, that I think you're a little bit self-deprecating. You've been in the region for a long time, and I think that you can really share some insight and some expertise that I didn't see a lot of times as an editor. A lot of travel writers these days are trying to cover everything, and you've been in the region for a long time. So it's great that you found that specialization. Yeah, and so right now I'm working at a nonprofit where I'm helping a lot of different writers to pitch to editors. And let me tell you, it's really hard. Okay, so I tell everybody from the beginning to manage their expectations, because it's extremely challenging to get something published these days. So I just want to start off with that. But it's not impossible. And as Alex mentioned, part of the reason that he asked me to join today is because I worked at National Geographic Travel for 7 years. I managed the digital travel team. And I would estimate that our staff of editors received about 1,000 pitches per week. And so that's a lot of competition. I bet a lot of the other major publications have similar numbers, and you really need to capture attention, have a unique idea, be timely, be informative, and a lot of tips that we'll talk about in the next few minutes. But there's a lot of competition out there. So I'd love to give you a little bit of my perspective as an editor, as somebody that cares a lot about digital platforms and just how to get your ideas published.
Thanks for that. And I've got a 2 or 3 questions. I sent them to you before. We haven't rehearsed them or anything, but I sent them to you before so you could have some idea. They're pretty vague. I would just suggest feel free to expound as you wish, or to answer as you wish. You don't need to stay within the confines of these exact questions. Why do you think, first of all, even before we get to the kind of slightly more micro aspect of the actual work of pitching a story, why is it important, do you think, for destinations to kind of be able to tell their own story, to be able to first find the unique story that is theirs? And I'm asking you, I mean, I know you have a lot of opinions as somebody who loves traveling and also loves Bosnia and Herzegovina, but just thinking from an editor's perspective, if you're getting, many pitches every day, why is it important when you read that pitch to feel like that destination really understands its own strengths and actually has a story to tell, its own story to tell?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the main question, right? I think that part of what I just said about how we've received so many pitches, 1,000 per week, that if you don't stand out and have a good idea, a unique idea with, a clear voice and showing your expertise and, really saying something new, then it's going to just pass over the eyes of the editor. So I think that there's really no better person to tell the story than locals. Experts, people like Alex that have been there for many years, but not somebody that's just passing through for a week on a press trip and not really, getting into the core of the destination. So, really just nobody can better tell the story than that local voice. And I think it's really important for the destination to be real with itself and think about, the strengths and the way it's unique, in an authentic way. I hate to use that word that's a little bit cliche, but if like I said, that we're getting 1,000 pitches per week, we can really tell if you're trying to fool us. It's not enough to just say like, this is the best place in the world. Why this topic? Why now? Why you? Why should we care? And it has to capture attention really quickly because, if you're just, opening an email for 10 seconds, it has to really get to the point. So there's a lot of competition out there. There's a lot of destinations. Travelers have to make choices. They, have to choose one destination over another. And I think that really the only thing that anybody can do is be authentic, rely on their local voice, their unique offerings. So I know that's a big question, Alex. I don't know if I really got to the core of it.
No, I think, look, to me, the most important thing here is the idea of having the conversation. I don't think that, especially in this era, I don't think people who do this for a living get a chance to really talk shop enough, because there's a lot that goes into this. Like you said, your take on it is particularly valuable because you were the gatekeeper for a long time and you still perform that role. And for us who are trying to get things published, it's not just about being quality, it's understanding how to be professional. And while we're talking about professionalism, I like to say, great painting behind you. Is that yours?
That's a leading question.
I know that it's yours, but I do like it, by the way. So as we're talking about this, maybe we can, I've been theorizing for most of the morning, but I think that this is probably a really good point with you here to start thinking, to describe some of the nuts and bolts, practical things that people need to do to actually communicate with editors. You and I have had this conversation on multiple occasions as well. I'm not a fan of being casual, especially with editors who you don't know. I mean, this is not an email to your buddy to say, hey, hope everything is great, cheers. I mean, there's a very specific need that you guys and gals as editors need for these pitches to perform. Could you give me an idea of kind of what you like to see when these kind of pitches come around? And I'm not saying word by word. I mean, you can do that if you want, but what's the important things that you need to know when you receive something to make sure that this person is a potential candidate for an assignment?
Yeah, I mean, there's really three things that I want to see in every pitch, and it doesn't matter if it's coming from a journalist or a destination, a tour operator, anybody, it's the same. Why this topic, why it's important, why I should care. Number one, why this topic, why now, why it's timely, why I should choose that topic now over the hundreds of other ideas that I could run, in the section this, coming up. Or third, why are you the best expert for the job? So why this topic, why now, and why this person should be the person to tell the story. So they're really just three basic questions that I think every pitch should answer. Before I even click into a pitch, though, which I assume is coming through email, it should also have a really sharp and attractive subject line that says that the idea is timely, or a little bit, about what that pitch is. And then once you click in, then you get some of those bullets of, like I just mentioned, why the topic is important, why we should run it now, and why this is the best expert to tell the story. But it's easier said than done. The pitch emails should be, timely, as I said. They should be short. They should capture attention. They should be written in a professional way that avoids, typos and jargons and that kind of obvious stuff. It should be factual. It should show that you know your stuff. You've done some homework. The topic that you're talking about. And then it should also show your familiarity with the publication. So if you're pitching a story about Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then they ran something, about Sarajevo last week, then it shows that you didn't even take the time to, scroll through and see what content they already have about the idea that you're pitching. So you got to do your homework. And then, I mentioned the subject line, but if somebody just ignores your email altogether, then, and without clicking into it, then, you miss that opportunity. So that's really, really important real estate as well.
One thing that I learned from you, I mean, it's not that I didn't know that headlines were important, but I learned from you talking about pitching over the years that, how important it was to, if you can, as a writer, you have your idea, great, and you're starting to pull your pitch together, but can you kind of encapsulate that into a strong headline that both, helps you to summarize what it is that you're doing, but also is one that shows that you have kind of the tools necessary to encapsulate the idea for the editor? I might just ask you a couple of questions and then hear what you have to say about the power of thinking in terms of headlines, the importance of the first few sentences of both the pitch and a story. And one first kind of micro question, would you suggest, and I asked this for my own education as much as anything else, would you suggest using that potential headline that you've created for your story when you're pitching as the subject line? I mean, what would your subject line? I'm not asking you to come up with that story idea right now, but what would your subject line, what would you like to see as an editor? What do you even want to see, like the word story, pitch, colon, headline, or whatever? I mean, what would work with you?
Yeah, I mean, those are important questions. I don't think that the subject line of the email necessarily needs to be the same as the headline that you're proposing for the article. You might want to flag the timeliness of the idea, that says, timely pitch, colon, new wine route was an example that I heard you mention as I was
Right.
going on, or the anniversary of something, or why, again, to get to that point of why now, because if they're going to make a choice between your idea and 1,000 other ideas, it should probably be timely, or unique, or maybe there's a big name that's sending the pitch that you want to highlight. But no, I don't think it necessarily has to be the same as what you're proposing as the headline in the article. I do think it's important that you think about the headline in the article. And, we all spend a lot of time on the internet, on reading, different social media or different websites. And so, just consider yourself in the place of the reader. I mean, what's going to make you click on that story to find out more, so always give the editor a headline idea, but also know that the editor might have, want to make changes to that. But the more that you can do for the editor to make the editor's job easy and to show that you're thinking about the tone of the publication that you're pitching and all of the elements of the story, I think the better. And as you were asking me this question, I realized that I left out one really important thing in the pitch message that I gave earlier is visuals. I mean, travel is an extremely visual content area. People want to see pictures of the place that you're talking about. So if you're pitching something that's so obscure, or, there's not going to be good images of it, or it already happened, or it's, something in the middle of the night, I don't know, but it's just something to think about from the beginning, visuals. I'm not saying that everyone needs to be a photographer, but a lot of pitches, a lot of good story ideas got turned down during my time at National Geographic because there were just no images available of that idea. So I don't have the best example in my head, but that's, it's just extremely important in this area. And then you said about the first few sentences, I mean, that should immediately give the editor a sense of your writing. And, and not everybody's a perfect writer, and there might be edits needed. There's almost always edits needed, but it should be clear. It should be an accessible tone. It should show that you are the right person for this job, and really to capture attention very quickly. So I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, imagine if you've ever, hired someone for a job and went through tons of applications, and you look at their resume for just a few seconds and then move on. It's very much the same kind of process. So I hope that answers a little bit of your.
No, that's great. That's really great. I mean, it's I don't want to make it seem like we've created some kind of incredibly value-added product for all those of you listening right now, but I can't tell you how incredibly rare it is to actually get the direct insight from an editor. I mean, most of us are spending our time just kind of doing our best to interpret what just happened, come up with our own scenarios, and to actually get direct information is great. So thank you. I have a couple of questions. The main one here, before I let you go, and then I'll let you go. And thanks a lot. Thanks tons, really, for taking the time to do this. And I'm sure folks out there are thankful too, to both get some real expertise, but also to hear somebody else's voice besides mine. One is, because everybody here is in the position of the question I'm about to ask, what kind of preference would a local voice, a local person who actually is from there? I mean, obviously, we all need to work on our writing to make sure that we're good enough to want to get published. And everybody here, I just want to make this point very clear. Every single person on this phone call has the ability and the chance to be published if you take the time to create good stories. I guarantee you, anybody here who has enough of an interest to actually attend this is good enough to cover stories probably already, but even potentially eventually, as well as somebody like me, for instance, does. So the question that I then ask is, you as an editor, what kind of preference do you show for true local voices? You and I both know that foreign folks visiting places also can provide a certain kind of first glance kind of expertise. But you and I are both travelers. Forget about the profession part of it. Just as travelers, you and I are both travelers who really admire and look for the real stuff. So you as an editor, what kind of preference would you give that kind of local knowledge, that kind of local voice?
We, as editors, I mean, you're always looking for the best expert for the job. So, in this case, talking about a destination, there is no better expert to talk about a destination than someone that is born in that place and, has that local voice. If you're not from the place that you're pitching, then I think you should have at least spent a lot of time there. Like I said from the beginning, it's very obvious when someone is pitching an idea that they just got on a press trip, or that they took a 1-week vacation through that place and, didn't really delve into the real essence of it. So I wouldn't say it's about preference. It's just really looking for the best person for the job, the best idea. And I think that's really hard to do if you don't come from that place or have a really great deal of experience in it. Yeah, I mean, there's no preference. And then the other thing I wanted to say too, Alex, is that, I didn't really I don't look for someone to be a super experienced journalist. I think that anybody could pitch this. You don't have to have gone to journalism school. You don't have to be, you don't have to have 10 things published in Condé Nast or the New York Times. You just have to show that you have a really good idea. You're an expert in this topic or in this place. And, to show some clip, something that shows that you are a strong writer. That can be from your personal blog, even. It could be from, something that you wrote for your website, your organization. It doesn't have to be the best publication, but it should have some sort of clip to show that you can write. So, but I guess it's not really, Alex, about giving preference to the locals as much as I think that those are the best people that could really speak about a destination. So those would be the ideas, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not like necessarily just giving the preference because they happen to be local, but the fact that they're local probably means that they know this place the best, and that's what you're looking for as an editor, is the best information. And a really good point there that I hadn't brought up yet that I want to make sure that folks know. Most editors, when you pitch them stuff, they want to see what you've done before. Now, if you haven't done something for a publication before, don't worry. Send them something so that they have an idea. And, also, I might also say that the pitch itself is a huge example of your writing, right? The editor then knows that you can think with brevity, think clearly, think in a way that you understand the tone of the publication. And with that, I want to say that I've got one more question for you, Christine, but I'll ask it at the very end. And first of all, I just want to say thanks a lot for taking the time to do this and to give everybody, including me, some information on just being a little bit more confident about pitching and working with editors and being travel writers, frankly.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I thought you said you had one more question, Alex.
I do, but I was going to ask it after you say thanks also, and then leave it. But anyway, I really appreciate it, Christine. And the question I was going to ask is, do you want to go to this wine route that they're opening? Wouldn't that be fun? You want to go check it out?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to visiting Bosnia and Herzegovina soon. It's been too many years, but I want to reiterate something that I said from the beginning, that this is really the kind of destination that that I got into this industry to write about and to publish about. You know, no offense to France and Italy, but we've read a lot about certain destinations and less about others. And I was incredibly proud to work on that story that you showed at the beginning, Alex, which was 2014, about Sarajevo. And there's so many good stories to tell here that I don't think are being told yet. So I really encourage everyone to think about all these tips and to think about your ideas. I feel like there's questions in the winemakers. So yeah, I think that's a great story to both capture local products, places that maybe some foreigners have not heard of, put some new smaller places on the map, get them out of the capital, get them around the country, experience the nature. And that kind of new route is exactly the sort of timely idea that I think an editor would go for, frankly. So
what really, before I let you go, why do you, and this is a question that could have an hour-long answer, but I know you've got things to do, so don't do that. But why is Bosnia and Herzegovina such a good, I mean, you and I both know that it has like this texture, it has like this density of culture that makes for great travel writing. But why do you, as a traveler, not even just as an editor, but why do you think it makes good travel journalism?
Wow, how much time do you have?
I mean, I know you can talk about it for days, but
yeah, I think that it's for me personally, it was a destination that really just sucked me in and got me tangled up. And it was a few years later that I left. It's a place that is challenging and complicated, but beautiful. There's so much natural beauty. There's so much incredible culture. There's great food. The people. So it's exactly the kind of destination that I like to go to. That is complex. That takes a little time to get to know. And yeah, I just think that there's really so much there that people should hear about, from nature, adventure, food, culture, the film festival, other festivals, the wine route. So yeah, how did Bosnia change you? And well, it's a good question too.
Please answer it.
Yeah.
If you want.
You go ahead. You go first, Alex. How did Bosnia?
No. I want to hear what you have to say. If you have time, I want to hear what you have to say. If you don't, I understand.
I think that I don't want to talk about difficult past too much, but I noticed that even the best publications, like the New York Times, for example, I'll pick on the New York Times. They sort of have this 1 or 2 sentence introduction about Bosnia and Herzegovina that they seem to like sort of republish every time in every story that mentions, this war-torn place that is emerged from a conflict. And we've all seen it, like they have this, little sentence disclaimer that they put at the top. And there's so much more that this place has to talk about and has to offer travelers. I
agree.
I think that it's misunderstood is what attracted me. And what I'm interested in as a person and as a traveler is the future. What is this place doing now? What do they have to offer now? And so you weren't going to find me at the the war tour or the tunnels and that kind of thing, because I think that that's not really what people in Sarajevo would want for travelers to see. I mean, I think they'd want them to see their culture, their beauty, what they have going on today. So I guess it's a surprising place. So that's what really just captured me, sucked me in. and kept me there for a long time. And it's, it's an incredible place that I really wanted to share. And as I said before, no offense to some of these other big European destinations, but I don't think that we're hearing enough about this country. So, I'm looking forward to hearing which ideas come out of this workshop that you've been giving this week.
And I don't think it's it's not a mischaracterization to say that your time in Sarajevo, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, definitely influenced the fact that you would eventually become an editor at National Geographic. Or am I wrong? Am I wrong about that?
And it made me think too that, hey, I'm not trying to say that I know so much about Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm not a local. I wouldn't ever presume to say that I have an understanding of this place. But I have been there and spent a little time there. And what struck me is that I knew a little bit about this place, but it made me think about when pitches come to me from other destinations that maybe I haven't been to, or I don't know a lot about the history, how much I need to rely on the writer to be an expert, and that they have to really have done their homework, know their stuff, and be the right person for the job, be the right person to tell that story. So I think that's getting at your point again, Alex, about the importance of local voices.
Yeah, I mean, that really brings up a great point there that, I mean, obviously we could go on and on and on about it, but that's another thing with regard to, readers want to trust that the writers actually know what they're talking about. I mean, they're about to take this person's advice and make a decision about how they're going to spend a part of their year, right? The 2 weeks that they've worked all year long, or the month that they've spent all year long saving for to go take a vacation, they're about to trust this person to do it. And Bosnia is such a good example because it is often so misrepresented by people who don't really give it the genuine credit that it deserves. I mean, yes, they say it's beautiful, but they also say a lot of other things that are not appropriate, frankly. So, I mean, that's just a really good point. And in some ways, Bosnia is a great example of a place that has such dense and great culture and is a good story anyway. And also, it's a good example of a country that needs to tell its own story so that it can take control of this situation of misrepresentation. It's a really great point, Christine.
Yeah, and Alex, a lot of the tips that we've talked about so far today, I think are really about features. They apply to everything, but we're talking about timely ideas and new offerings. But I will say too, if you don't know where to get started, look at all of the guide content that different sites have for your destination, and make sure that they're really the best tips and the best advice that you as a local would give. Think about, if you have a friend visiting you, like, where do you want to show them? Do you want to take them to, the War Museum, or do you want to take them somewhere else? And I think that that's a really great place for people that don't have a lot of writing experience to get involved, is to look at those guides, because it's equally as important with the features. There's also a service component too that travelers need to actually plan their trips. So I think that that's just another opportunity.
I love that idea right there of what you just said. And that's a huge one. And that's one that a lot of folks on this phone call can probably use to their advantage. Look at what people have written about for places in the country, and think about, not in a negative way or in a weird way, but in an honest way, what are the ways that people are typically seeing Bosnia and Herzegovina? And then think about, what are things that you as a local person would never do? I mean, yes, there's a lot of things that are being suggested that folks do. There's a lot of things that are being suggested that a local person would never do, right? And suggesting the thing that you as a local expert would do is also a really nice angle, right? So going to do the things that everybody suggests because they're just Googling the last story and repeating it, that's not helpful. But you have an expertise that people actually want to hear. They want to hear what they could avoid to actually do something to replace that activity with something that's better.
I think there's a question in the chat that I'm not sure that
if it's appropriate for you to answer it, I would love for you to.
I think that how Bosnia has changed you. Love to hear from you on that. And would you agree that Bosnia reshaped your future? Is maybe the question that the second part of that question that hasn't been answered yet.
Are you asking me? No, because you know me well enough to know I'll just talk and talk and talk, and people who are tired of that. I'll only say that it changed me fundamentally. It basically made me want to be a travel writer. I owe a lot to this country in a way that I probably will never be able to repay, because the people that I know there have shaped me and what I've done in the future, and my desire to be passionate and to fight for places rather than just drift through them quickly as somebody who's trying to make a paycheck from travel journalism, as opposed to somebody who wants to know a place, was essentially created in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So, I mean, it's hard for me to even describe it. It didn't just reshape my future. It basically became my future in a way. So, yeah, I mean, I'm even kind of getting goose pimples just thinking about it. So, no, it was pretty important. And I know it was for you too. So, I mean.
Yeah, at the time I was, working and writing for a different kind of industry. And I don't think that I would have ended up, pursuing this path of sustainable tourism and travel content and travel media if not for my time in Sarajevo. That's an honest answer. And, I think I touched on a couple of points about, just wanting to make sure that destinations are properly represented, that they're not always looking at the past, that they're looking at today and into the future, that we could give, deeper stories about places. And it's really, it's a place that made me become an editor for a travel magazine. I first worked at the print product and then moved to the digital platforms. So that's an honest answer. So I really hope that you guys all think of great stories from this place and that I can come back really soon.
Well, my question, I'll let you go now, but I'll just again say thanks a ton, Christine, for taking the time. And my question about, I'm going to check in with you. If we're both free and we want to go to a wine route in Herzegovina and travel in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I'm going to check in. I'm going to ask you again. So be warned. I'm going to ask. You don't have to say yes, but I'm going to ask because I want to go. I want to check out the new wine route. I think that would be super fun, and to go as a traveler and a writer, whatever.
Well, I really can't wait to see it. And, thank you so much for the questions and for everyone's attention today and for getting me talking and thinking about these topics. It's really important. And it's important for me to think of how best to, verbalize what makes a good pitch and what makes a good story. I mean, it's really difficult and something that I think both experienced writers and editors and less experienced writers and future writers need to constantly be challenging themselves to think of the best stories and the best pitches. I'm just going to drop my information in the chat, and if anybody wants to follow up with me or keep in touch, I would love to hear from you.
Awesome.
And thank you so much for asking me to join.
Draga Christine, hvala što ste nam.
Dear Christine, thank you. Okay, sorry. Just to jump in from the project side, a question for you and for Alex as well. What was the most interesting thing in Bosnia and Herzegovina that you actually wrote about?
The most interesting thing you've written? Or?
Well, actually, our two answers probably are very similar. I mean, the year that maybe not. I don't mean to say that in such a know-it-all kind of way, Christine. I've written so many stories about Bosnia and Herzegovina, not all great, but all that I was proud of. I was proud of all of them anyway. But I've written so many that it's hard for me to even think through all of them. from mountains to Via de Nautica to Sarajevo to different towns and different national parks and so forth. But I'll say, just for the sake of kind of being appropriate for this moment, the story that I wrote for that piece that Christine also edited was an important one. And it's also a good example of a travel story. So not only was it for National Geographic Traveler, which is, it was a huge magazine, but that was a year that Sarajevo was named one of the best in the world destinations for 2014, which, as most folks in the travel industry know, is a pretty big distinction. Destinations want that. They want to be one of those 50. And the reason was, and I'm only bringing this up because Christine and I both worked on that story, largely based on her expertise of knowing Sarajevo to ask the questions of me to improve it. And me living in Sarajevo at the time allowed us both to have, yes, not a local perspective, definitely not, but a perspective that was probably more informed than most foreigners. But the second part of what I was going to say that made it, in my opinion, a really good story as an example for an idea here for folks is that it also had a great peg, a great news peg, a great time peg, a great why now peg. And that was, it came out in 2014, which was the 100th anniversary of the beginning of World War I, right? So we had this classic time peg. Sarajevo is already interesting, filled with a lot of great things to see. When you combine it with that kind of news time peg, it becomes an irresistible story, right? And not surprisingly, National Geographic Traveler decided to print it.
Yeah, I would say that was a proud moment for me too. I remember sitting in that conference room with all the editors, and we're going through hundreds of ideas, and I pushed real hard for that one. I really wanted that one to happen. And although it was a smaller story, to be part of the best of the world for the year was great. I really was proud of that. And the other one I would mention was, it's going back some years, but a story that you wrote and that I edited on Lukomir was also a great example. It's a little, I'm sure there's lots of villages that, that you could talk about in that way, but this is some years back. But I felt like that story had the whole package. It had hiking, it had adventure, it had, a smaller place, the local stays, the food. It was well done, the visuals. It was a really well piece that I thought a lot of people could connect with.
That was a real. I'm embarrassed that I forgot that we because I guess because I was just seeing this picture from that story from Sarajevo. But yeah, that was a really good one. I feel like I got really lucky on that one. I mean, the story itself, this is a good example of how stories become stories. The story itself wasn't based on a pitch that I sent. It was actually based on the fact that National Geographic had a bunch of really great images from Lukomir, who did the photography on that? Gafic.
I'm embarrassed. I can't think of the name at this moment. Maybe you could share it with everyone.
Yeah. No, it was Gafic. It was great photography, really great photography. And I got lucky enough because I happened to be around to write the story about it. And that's a really good example of how stories can be different. I mean, National Geographic had great images and they wanted to deliver a really great package about something that most folks didn't know that much about. And they did it through the lens of this, Lukomir, which I thought was a great story. I mean, not because I wrote it, but because I was just really pleased and proud to have a chance to write about it. Yeah, that was cool. Yeah, really cool.
And that's another example too. Zia Gafic, local photographer, and was chosen for his local perspective and voice there too. So
And he's a great photographer. I mean, just really a great photographer. So, I mean, for me, the whole writing that story was a little bit more pressure filled than it typically is for me, because I felt like I needed to actually write something that was worthy of the images. Usually it happens in reverse. You know, I pitch a story, an editor says yes or no, but if they say yes, then I cover the story, and then they cover the story, and then the editor figures out how they're going to find the photography and the artwork, as they call it, the images to go along with the story. This was a different one. It's like somebody handed me incredible photographs that I basically wasn't going to be able to do justice through my writing, and then I had to write a good story. And boy, that was fun. That was cool. And I thought that story worked out really well. I'm proud of that story for sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the
You're
great
welcome.
questions.
Thanks. Sorry about keeping you so long. Wine route, Christine, wine route.
Please, someone share that information with me so I can start planning a trip. Sounds great. Thank you, everybody. Like I said, I put my email in the chat. If you have any follow-up questions or didn't feel like your question got answered, please email me. I'd love to hear from you.
Super. Thanks a lot, Christine.
Bye.
Bye. Well, gang, let's go into, in the brief time we have left, and I'm going to just let everybody know that we've got, we're going to go over by about 10 minutes. I'm sorry about that, but I do want to provide some more information here. I'm guessing that most of the people on this call, at this workshop, will have access to these slides as part of the Academy. I want to reiterate that I am available to communicate if folks here want to. We're getting to that place now where we're colleagues. We've been having this conversation long enough to where we're starting to understand each other. And at this point, this is a good time for us to actually talk about what it means to do stories. So I just want to just make a few points here about about writing itself. One is, and I'm just going to do this not quickly, but I want to make the point here in a way that brings us to, with voice, tone, and focus when you're writing the story, use active voice. Get to the point of what's being done. Somebody does something, as opposed to this is the action of that person. Think an active voice, you know. And then what I like to do for any of these stories is I like to start with a visual of what it is that I'm doing. I show. I don't tell what that is, I show it. And then after I've started to show what the story is about and people become emotionally invested, only then, after a couple of paragraphs, I can take a step backwards and to describe maybe the background, the backstory, the history of what it is that we're talking about. People don't necessarily want to see that in the beginning. They're not emotionally invested yet to learn. The beginning of a story needs to be direct in some ways, but it also does need to entertain. It's the same thing with a pitch. You obviously don't want to just do fluffy entertainment, but it needs to keep people interested enough to move to the next part of the story. So for me, I often start with something that is clear and direct, but it's also a visual on the moment that we're looking at, something that is a representative of a moment. If the story is about Sarajevo, maybe the moment is at the outdoor market, buying food. The story isn't about the market, but the story is, but the story of the market tells a story about Sarajevo. So I'm trying to make sure that people understand, come into the city in a way that entertains them, so that I can then, a few paragraphs later, come back with some backstory about the city. As you're going along, and before you turn anything in, whether it's a pitch or a story, make sure you're fact checking yourself along the way. You're self-editing. You're looking for typos. I know that sounds ridiculous, but little things make a difference. If there's a lot of grammatical errors, or there's typos, or, you know, mistakes in the text. The whole thing may be beautiful, but if you have a bunch of those, an editor notices, and they start to become turned off, not just because they're little mistakes, but these are little clues that an editor is always trying to piece together to decide whether or not this writer can actually handle this assignment or future assignments. If the work you present is good, but it's always sloppy, an editor is less likely to continue using you, because those mistakes eventually get through. Those mistakes end up being work for the editor to deal with. That's your work. That's not the editor's work. The more often that the editor needs to deal with your mistakes, the less likely they will hire you again. I had this on here several times while Christine was talking, because I thought that it was an appropriate thing to show as she was talking. But, you know, as an editor once told me, not Christine, but another editor from before told me, my job as a writer is to make their life easier, right? I'm not a prima donna in this. I'm somebody who is giving information and providing a good story that the editor can then use for their publication to attract readers. I have to make their life easy. I need to turn in clean copy, meaning no mistakes. I need to be clear about what the story is. I need to be clear about who the resources are, the people that I'm going to be interviewing. I need to think in deadlines. I need to fact check myself. I like to copy down all of the websites that I visited as I visit them, so that I know that I can go back to and share it with the editor where I got this information from. As Christine said, what an editor asks is, why now? Why is this story good now? Can this story be easily explained? Are there simple connections between the culture and the adventure? In my case, that's the kind of stuff I like to write about. Remember that you're selling them a product, one that they want to buy, and they want to continue to buy it, but they need to believe that you're professional enough to do it. That means a brief 3-paragraph pitch describing the situation, describing why you're the person to write this story, and describing how you will be able to do it in a way that makes it easy for them. Also provide some information about how to let them know how many words and what you've done before. I'm going to give one. I want to give this movie one brief video, and then we'll talk about this, and then I'm going to let you go. And here it is.
Slovenia Green Gourmet Route is a cycle journey across Slovenia, but it's more than that. It's a ride across a country that's been called the world's most sustainable destination, and one named the European Gastronomic Region of the Year. The route is a 10-stage adventure that takes travelers into the mountains and to Michelin-starred restaurants, where some of Slovenia's most important treasures, its fresh and natural food and fantastic wine, are shared.
I collect the young cheese, and I age them and take care of them for close to 40 years.
The Slovenia Green Gourmet Route builds bridges between communities, delicious food, and offers everyone to travel in a sustainable way. So everyone can discover this beautiful country on 2 wheels.
Slovenia is first very small and very different. Every 50 kilometers you have a different situation, nature, different climate, different even dialects and people. We have one language, but 2 million of people, we have 46 dialects.
I think that the greatest thing of our region is not just the local products and all the outdoor activities that we developed in the past years, like hiking and biking, but the force of our region are our people.
which takes cyclists through the Socha Valley, Goriška Brda, the Vipava Valley, the Karst region, Ljubljana, and along the Sava and Drava rivers, is a rolling tour across diverse landscapes, historic sites, incredible scenery, and through vineyards where you can earn your wine.
Oops, excuse me. I'm going to take 1 minute to say here, as we, since I stopped it anyway, and we'll finish it real quick. But the purpose of this is to show how similar the possibilities are for story ideas for Slovenia and Bosnia. Very similar countries in this way. Essentially, this is a route. This is different than the route that I spoke about before, where it was Bike Slovenia Green. This is the Slovenia Green Gourmet route. It's a different route, basically combining food and adventure. But the story is a simple one. Starts somewhere, ends somewhere, goes to 10 different places, eats food that's different in each of those places, drinks wine in each of those places, and there's a different culture along the way. And the story itself is the story of Slovenia. It actually, this goes from the northwestern part of Slovenia, it comes all the way through the western part, comes to Ljubljana, and then goes eventually to the west, to the east along the Sava River, and then up to Maribor. So it's an entire story. I mean, this is a great story for a country and for a publication. So we'll watch this for a couple more minutes, and then we'll get to the end of this and take some questions.
So our tourist destination is small, only about 40 different tourism service providers. And the importance of them working together is great, because as an individual, they're not strong, but as a whole, we are strong. So that means that we have to work together. We have to communicate, and all of the destination has to work as one synchronous unit.
The Slovenia Green Gourmet route is also the perfect place to learn more about the country where Tour de France and Olympic cycling legends are born, and a trail that takes you deeper into the natural conditions that make this one of the best cycle touring destinations in Europe and indeed the world.
Yeah, you have the Alps, you have the seaside, you have the Pannonian side, you have the inner side.
And of course, at Teta Frida, in our beautiful natural park, Natura 2000, every traveler is going to find a real chocolate experience and satisfy all their senses.
So, get your gear together, download the maps, prepare your palate, and hop on your bike to ride the Slovenia Green Gourmet route, where your experiences, from appetizer to entree to dessert, are already served up and waiting for you. You'll just need to earn them with your legs, your appetite, and your imagination.
So I'm just going to go over a couple of more story ideas, and I want this to be something that we can use as ideas, maybe to help create ideas in writers here in the audience, their ideas for stories. Again, I want to make the point here with that particular route. That could easily be Bosnia, right? Bosnia and Herzegovina. It happens to be Slovenia, but that's a good idea for a story to go on a ride through the country and visit different places. I mean, that's a good story idea, regardless of whether there's a route created. The beauty of the route, of course, is you have a bunch of places that are all actively working to do something. But not all stories have to be based on products. In fact, they shouldn't be. They're sometimes just based on good ideas. Bosnia and Herzegovina has wine that most people haven't heard of. Automatically, that's a good story idea. Cycling in the country is great in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Again, another good story idea. You don't have to cycle. Maybe you just go to the vineyards. Right here, we have the Via Nautica. This Via Nautica, which I'm guessing most people in the audience are familiar with, was something that we're all working on, thinking about as early as like 2007. Of course, it became more of an official route in the years since. But this is another National Geographic story that was that started as an idea to just have a trail represent the region, and it became really a story because what I realized is it wasn't just hiking; it was about coming to the different places. The hiking is just the vehicle. That's not the story. The story is the places that you get to. So it took me a little while because we were so involved in the actual creation of the trail that I had sometimes forgot about the actual value of the story. And, that story is incredibly valuable. This is obviously a classic route story, but there's one other I wanted to show while we're here. I have several, but, again, please go find these because this is to be made available for people who are participating. This is a story, and this is the last one that I'll give as an example. This in Galicnik is a village in North Macedonia. It's another National Geographic story. I didn't choose National Geographic stories on purpose, but that's what these are all from. And I wrote this about the village. I think I actually wrote about this for the New York Times also, but the village of Galicnik in Macedonia, every year they have this wedding festival, and the wedding festival, basically two young people who are engaged to be married will wait until the summer for their patron saint day to be married in a festival in Galicnik. This is a good story idea because it does many things all at once. First of all, it happens every year, which means you always have this time peg. An editor can gauge when they run this story based on the timeliness of it. And second of all, this is unique. I don't know many places that have this kind of festival. So, at one time it shows the culture. There's obviously a lot of great food, tons of alcohol. People are partying. There's tons of music. All of the culture of this place is happening like in full strength on this weekend. And it has a specific time when it happens. So this is something that shows the greater culture through a small story. But that's the larger point here, is to understand more about the large culture so you can focus in on the microscope version of it that's the digestible version for the reader, so that the reader gets excited about wanting to travel to these places. I mean, at the end of the day, you've succeeded as a writer, not because you've written the best thing of all time, but because you've excited people to learn more. Maybe by the end of the traveler's trip, they know more about it than you do. But if you gave them the inspiration to go do that, you've done your job. If you write a great story, then good for you, but that's not the point. So I have, as our kind of last moment here, our next exercise. We won't have another break because we're already running 15 minutes late. I tend to always do that. I apologize. Take your 3 ideas that we started this with. Come up with the one that fits the most different criteria of what makes a good story. It's easy to explain. It describes your culture in a way that is both accurate and that you're proud of. It is something different than most folks have heard of before. Maybe there's something that makes it timely for now. Maybe it's something that takes in multiple aspects: culture, food, gourmet, adventure. and puts it into a way that takes a bigger subject and puts it into a micro version so that folks get excited about learning more. These kinds of story ideas then need to be put into a more specific, concise summarization proposal that you're going to be sharing with an editor. That pitch, that proposal, that pitch should start in an engaging way that gets to the point about what it's for. In North Macedonia, a village named Galichnik has a wedding festival every single year. This village, with only 2 residents full-time, hosts thousands of people who want to come and learn more about Macedonian culture, traditions, and food. Editor knows a lot there that they didn't know previously, and it didn't take 2 or 3 paragraphs to get there. In that pitch, you should also explain why it is that you're an expert who should be writing the story. I grew up in this village, or my grandparents are from this village, and I know this wedding festival as well as I know anything in life because I've been going there for the last 30 years. I have access to the people who run the festival and plan it, and I know the couple that's getting married this year. I can provide great images and really good interviews with these people. And then at the bottom of the pitch, something that shows that you've written before, either something you've done before or something that you've done that is kind of travel journalism quality that you want to share to make sure that they know that you can actually put together a story. This one idea should be able to fulfill those requirements. And does it show Bosnia and Herzegovina in a correct way? That's how we started this discussion, and it's how I also want to end it. At the end of the day, cheap marketing campaigns are easy, but they will always eventually fail. If you trust yourself and you write stories that best represent you, your region, your country, the people who live near you, your traditions and your customs, you've already succeeded, because those are the things that will never go away and that you didn't have to pay to earn. They're yours from the beginning. Keep that in mind with the stories that you want to publish. At least that's my opinion. You do what you want, but in my opinion, those are some of the most important aspects of publishing stories. Ones that at the end of the day you want to share instead of ones that you're embarrassed by. And with that, I'll leave you here with my website here. If you look on my website, if you choose to, my contact information is easy to find. You look under the about or whatever it says on my website, and you'll find my email address. It's not hidden. You can just find it and email me as you choose. If you decide to, I would be thrilled and honored to hear from you and to learn more myself, because as I said from the beginning, this is all about learning. I'm doing my best to know more about Bosnia, but I'll never be a perfect expert. I'm always going to be somebody who's learning. And, if we can all help each other to get to a place where we're learning more about writing, we're learning more about the destinations, we're learning more about what we can do to do a better job, then I think that we're going to be in better shape than we were if we're just trying to hope that this gets solved on its own. So again, thank you. I want to say thank you again to Turizam for having me, and for USAID and for the project for asking me to participate, and for tolerating me, and especially for the interpreters who have had to listen to my voice now for 10 hours, something like that. Thank you all very, very much. Are there any questions before we leave that we can get to folks out there in the tourism world? Are there any questions that you've gotten?
Dragi Alex, izvin, malo nama duže treba da završiš, pošto...
Dear Alex, because we have simultaneous interpretation, it takes us time to finish the interpretation and then to address you. So all the questions that we got from the participants, you already answered, both you and Christine. So that's it. As for the questions, thank you very much on our part for working with us, delivering this presentation. Hopefully you will be soon visiting Bosnia. We'll meet in person and we'll organize some route to see the wine route in person. Thank you for the interpreters. And all the thanks go to all the attendees that bore with us, that stayed with us the entire day. And thank you, those of you who are listening this for the second or the third time because of registering again. Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. And everybody, you can do it. We can all do it together. Don't always believe in yourself. We can do this. We can write great stories. Thanks again, you guys. And I'll see you in Bosnia later on this year. Bosnia and Herzegovina, excuse me. Bye-bye.
Doviđenja.
Goodbye to you too.